And I was thinking, this is like, well, all they've done is they've just, and again, it probably, by Michelin standard, you've got to spend 200k on a toilet. But I think, most restaurants in London could massively up their perceived value through like an Easter egg of surprise. Like just making the toilets slightly better. Do you know what I mean? Because most of them, as you say, it's like, they get the front of stage looking great, and then you go to the toilet and it's like...
Still, in other words, you're dining on the second floor and the toilet's in the basement. That is a serious pisser. It used to really piss me off in London stations that they always put the toilets underground so they had space for another branch of, Oliver Bonus. So people with luggage were forced to drag their bags down 4 flights of steps in order to have a piss. That always struck me as fundamentally annoying. And a lot of that I think is done for kind of real estate reasons. In other words, you bury the toilets underground because the ground level is more valuable as retail than it is as toilets. Toilets are interesting actually because they're an absolutely classic case of market failure. Because generally in the UK and the US you never charge for them. Slightly different in continental Europe, where in France until recently you have an elderly French woman just sitting in the toilets taking tips. Okay, and because you don't pay for toilets. Consequently, there's no incentive to actually provide them. And I would argue that the public are badly, and having had some prostate surgery, you're made acutely aware of this, the public in London is very badly served. Train travellers are extremely badly served for restroom provision. So the new London Bridge Station, for example, unless you're disabled, in which case you can use the key to get into the disabled toilets on the platform, if you are changing trains at London Bridge Station, you have no access to a toilet at all, and the toilets that do exist require you to go through a barrier and walk about 100 yards. Now, given that they spent, 300 million on that station, okay, that strikes me as an abominable failure to serve the customer. And we're starting to see this as basically more and more organisations are just run by the finance function and have no real focus on customer centricity. What the finance function do is they fall into this incredibly dangerous trap of thinking that where you make money is where you're adding value. Okay? They're thinking that the things that people pay for are the things that are valuable. But as someone who knows, a restaurateur learns very quickly that that isn't true. That there are things like atmosphere, vibe, crowd, etc., that contribute massively to the enjoyment of an establishment, which you can't directly charge for.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I wrote about this in my newsletter. I was interviewing my mate who owns Black Bear Burger, which is, if you ever want a good burger in London, incredible.
Where is it? Oh, there must be several.
They've got one in Brixton. They've got one in Exmouth Market. But their whole point is we're a restaurant that does burgers. We're not a burger restaurant.
Got it.
It's really interesting. But we were basically, and he started off in street food in Hackney. And we were basically saying that, we were saying street food is like comedy, whereas restaurants are like movies. And by that I mean, is what we're saying is in street food, it's like, you say a joke, a comedian says a joke, and it's just the instantaneous feedback. It's like the crowd laugh or they don't. Right?
Yes.
In street food, you give someone a shit burger, they're not going to like it, right? You give someone a good burger, they laugh or they do enjoy it. In street food, we're out there all alone, basically, and it's just the relationship. He says, but that's why...
QSR restaurants and street food, the feedback is very fast.
Feedback's very fast.
So I always recommend, actually, if you can work in hospitality, it's a free MBA. Because you get to understand every component of the business, from supply to marketing to sales to all the sort of stuff about staff psychology and teamwork. You get all of that. It's like a big business in microcosm. So you get to understand everything and how it fits together. I also think that working in hospitality is brilliant because, like comedy, the feedback's fast.
Yeah.
So very weirdly, you'll occasionally go to a very small comedy club and you'll come across someone like Chris Rock, okay, doing a slightly weird, slightly stumbling routine.
With notes and saying, like, this is going to be shit.
And what's interesting about it is that some of the jokes aren't funny, and you think, why the hell is Chris Rock playing this very small venue?
Yeah.
And the reason he's doing it is he's trying out his big material before he goes onto the big stage. Yeah. And so people are grateful enough to have Chris Rock in a small venue that they don't mind if a few of the jokes fall flat. Mm-hmm. And he'll occasionally go, that one didn't really work, did it? I'll obviously have to reshape that. And I agree with you that quick service restaurants, fast food, and street food have that incredible strength that you get fast feedback.
Yeah.
And therefore the speed in which you can evolve your offering. Now, if you contrast that with, say, customer service for a bank, right? And what I always say to banks is, you can't learn much about your customer service in a bank because it's too slow. Nobody changes their bank account for 15 years, okay? If you piss off a customer, they don't actually leave, they just become inert. They keep their current account open, they just don't buy anything else from you. So you can invest in customer service in a bank and you don't know whether it's worked for 6 years, okay? And it's very hard to measure because so much has happened in the intervening time that attributing, say, customer retention or cross-sales to a particular investment in customer experience is very, very slow and very inexact. So what I'd argue that a bank needs to do is go and steal from fast food restaurants, which very quickly learn what they're actually doing. And you know if you're failing very quickly and you know if you're succeeding very quickly. Now, this is actually where it gets very interesting because you have this business where businesses are controlled by the finance function. And the finance function is, broadly speaking, Aspergic. And it's incapable of doing something for which there is no prior evidence. And I had this discussion with somebody in a business I better not name, but I said, can anybody answer a question? I said, Amazon has a thing called Call Me Back as part of their customer service.
Call me back.
Call me back.
Yeah.
So let's say you order something from Amazon and it doesn't arrive, or the locker's wonky, or something like that. You go online, you say, this is the product with which I have a problem. This is who I am, because you're logged in, okay? This is what my problem is. Now call me back. And about 6 seconds later, someone who already knows who you are, so you don't have to go through an identity procedure, calls you back and says, I understand that your hat didn't arrive. Is there anything we can do to help? Now, psychologically, the fact that they call you is very powerful because you're made to feel like a valued customer, not a supplicant. If you're made to wait on a phone call, you feel like a supplicant, they don't really want to talk to me, they're trying to avoid me. Whereas if they ring you, it feels like a genuine service call. That's one psychological factor. But the second thing is, it's incredibly efficient at problem solving very quickly. And I've asked various other service-led brands, why has nobody else stolen that? Literally, I've never come across anybody else doing that. And they said, well, we tried to do it, but the finance department said they need to see the business case and the cost-benefit analysis. Okay, to which my answer was, you don't need a business case, right? Here's your business case. Amazon do it. Amazon test everything. Amazon get very, very fast feedback on what customer service investments work and what customer service investments don't work because people buy from Amazon very, very frequently. So you can quickly see if something you're doing is having a deleterious effect on sales. Just go and steal from Amazon. If the finance people say, no, you have to prove it, okay, it's a fundamental drag on innovation. This requirement that every single item of business expenditure, and it's a myth spread by management consultancies, by finance people, by tech firms, the idea that you can create a perfectly quantifiable business. And one of the reasons businesses aren't growing is they're not allowed to do anything they can't prove, and by definition, anything new has some element of uncertainty about it. Anything significantly innovative will have an element of uncertainty in terms of how it plays out. If you're not allowed to do those things, effectively all you can do is take business as usual and try and cut costs, which is exactly what we see from businesses. And so effectively, there's a fundamental imbalance in business activity, and I blame all kinds of left-brain entities for this, which is the need for quantification and measurement has prevented what you might call meaningful innovation and opportunities from being discovered.
That's why I think I'm obsessed with restaurants. So back to the sort of the street food thing is I think you're right. You get the fast feedback. That's where you can really test your offering.
Yep.
But then as Stu was saying from Black Bear Burger, is once you've got that down, you can then go into a restaurant setting, which is what they did, and you've got like special effects.
So
the service
they use the street food effectively as what you might call the canary in the mine, as it were.
Well, like that's Chris Rock testing his special, and then the restaurant. Sorry, it's working on his special. Then the restaurant's actually the special, so it's the lights. But the lights could be so for them. They realise that eating hip hop's the best music to play to eat a burger to. They realise that they were actually going to. I think we talked about last time. You know that restaurant that got the beer sommelier. Mm-hmm. They realised, okay, the way we're going to beat Shake Shack and
I think he went to William Gadara, isn't it? Will Gadara, who wrote this fantastic book, which I'm going to plug, which is called Unreasonable Hospitality.
So
which I think has. Now, it's very easy to say, well, hold on, he's at the very, very top end of the restaurant game. But that's not to say that he's without financial constraints. Absolutely not. It's very expensive running a restaurant.
There's a great podcast where they have a Michelin-star chef who talks about the margins of a great restaurant. He's basically saying they make 3%. These big Michelin-star restaurants. What they'll do is someone like a Gordon Ramsay will make, maybe not Gordon Ramsay, but one of these big chefs like Paul Ainsworth won't make much money on his Michelin-star restaurant number 6, but will then have his pub, his bistro, and as a collective, the margins work.
So this is very interesting because I think that the need for every single part of your business to make money, which is imposed by finance, okay, is actually an obstacle to existing businesses creating what you might call these ecosystems. Where, I mean, an example of an ecosystem would be catwalk fashion, okay, doesn't make any money, right? Paris Fashion Week, nobody wears those clothes, nobody buys them. Not many people are both rich enough and attractive enough to walk around with their breasts hanging out, right? Okay, right, okay. There may be people who are attractive enough, there may be people who are rich enough, but the overlap on that Venn diagram probably isn't all that big, okay? Now, or the third circle is comfortable with doing such a thing, okay? What you do is you run that business effectively as a flagship for your diffusion brands, okay? And so what's quite interesting about what the business we're in, which is sort of personal broadcasting, okay? It's a very complicated ecosystem where you write a book, you do paid talks, you do podcasts, some of which make more money than others, but effectively, in combination, you make more money if you do all of those things than if you only do 2 of them, okay? Okay, let's try going on the US financial speaker circuit, which is the most insanely lucrative in terms of payment by the hour. The US business speaker circuit is ludicrously well paid, and the financial circuit is literally, if you've got a Nobel Prize for economics, it's kind of like $100,000 a pop. Okay, now the point is, what the kind of the financial logic would say is just do those things. Don't write a book because it's much less profitable as a use of your time. Okay, don't appear on podcasts. Don't do anything that isn't speaking to the Deutsche Bank annual conference in Florida, or wherever it might be. Okay. However, the real money is to be made in actually doing all of those things, some of which, yes, when separated out, are more lucrative than others, but they're not really separable in terms of the overall value equation. And the same thing will be true there with fashion, where catwalk fashion is effectively done for the halo effect.
Yes.
So you sell a lipstick at a margin of 90% because there's someone with their breasts out walking down a catwalk in Paris. Okay. Now, it'd be very, very easy to say, let's get out of that business, but when you get out of that business, you can no longer sell the lipstick.
It's the sum of the whole.
And so similarly, I mean,
well, there's a chef called Tommy Banks who's he's got one of the best restaurants I think I've ever been to up north, and it's a destination restaurant called the Black Swan in Old Stead.
I've heard of it.
Marvelous.
Never been there.
Unreal. Like the food was just it was amazing. Anyway, he then again so that's his halo. Then he's got the Diffusion One, which is his. Got another restaurant in York called Roots, another pub called the Byland Inn or something like that. Anyway, I just saw on Instagram last night. he is selling pies at York Farmers Christmas Market for 3 weeks. But because he's got the Michelin star credentials, those pies are going to fly out like hotcakes or hot pies, I should say, because he's got that sort of brand ecosystem.
And if he wants to, he can wander along to Dispatch or any of those.
Sorry, then he's got Made in Oldstead, so he's already got that. He's got.
So that's on Shopify, presumably, is it?
I think.
I might have seen that on Shopify. For some strange reason, the shop app seems to recommend quite a lot of pies to me. I don't know why that might be, but I've got a vague idea that that's appeared on my shop app recommendation.
What pies do you like?
I think the pie is one of the great British contributions to food. If you look at British food, okay, we excel at breakfast and tea, not lunch and dinner, and we also
is that northern tea like
but also tea time food. I mean, those kind of finger sandwiches, scones, etc. And we also seem to excel at food that's portable. Whether it's the pasty, the pie, the sandwich, all of them seem to have originated with us. If you want food that you can carry around, okay, British food's your thing.
Yeah, I interviewed Julian Metcalf last week who did Pret and Itsu, and he was saying that Itsu's not piece of piss, that's quite, but it's been much easier to go international with Itsu because it's like people understand they're focusing on just Asian food.
Got it.
Whereas Pret, as in the sandwich, was inherently more difficult because you go to Lebanon or I don't know where else, or New York, and the sandwich, maybe New York's an example, but the sandwich doesn't just translate to like people get sushi wherever you are, really. Sushi,
Yes.
But like the nuance per market is so different in those things. I think to your point, like we're fucking great at like portable food. There's a great business called Willie's Pies.
Go on, tell me more. Yeah.
So clever. They've kind of stepped back and they've broken all the rules. And they looked at a category that was dead or like kind of archaic. I think it's much easier to pick an archaic category and reinvent it. So pies, like no one's really reinvented pies. He worked at St. John and Brat, so he's got the credentials and the status of being a great chef. Then they started making these pies during lockdown. He's on furlough, and they are, if you like a pie roll, they're fucking delicious, like really good flavours. But then the stroke of genius is they stepped back from, they looked at sort of the distribution landscape, and most pies would go into either your farmer's market, your sort of deli, your Whole Foods, potentially your Waitrose. And everyone sort of looked at that. I always talk about Slipstream channel. There's a channel which you can just aggressively attack, which no one else is thinking about. And now it all makes sense in retrospect. They've gone into Arsenal Football Club. They've gone into pies and footballs, pie and mash. They're playing on all that sort of old.
Have you been to the Midlands? Because the big football food there is the Balti pie. Have you ever tried one?
No,
so it's the ultimate fusion
pie
food.
Is a great thing,
it's a brilliant thing. But someone brought me a Balti pie. I think they were a fan of possibly the Saddlers.
Who are the Saddlers?
You're a Brummie, Anna. Is it Coventry or the Saddlers? I can never remember. But anyway, it's one of those Brummie teams. Anyway, they've been to one of those teams. They come back with their Balti pie, it was fantastic. I mean, this was literally in a wrapper. It didn't look very promising, but I cooked it and it was absolutely sensational. I also think there's something, now you've got most households have a microwave and an air fryer. There must be some interesting way of one thing I'm going to really criticise the food industry, and I do rant to our clients about this all the time, is when microwaves were only in 30% of homes in my childhood, loads and loads of people brought out microwave meals, okay, which was absolutely signified as such. The number of people who brought out air fryer meals, in fact, the number of foodstuffs which actually have air fryer instructions on the cooking, some M&S products now do, is ludicrous. It shows a complete failure of innovation because you have this, and I would also argue there must be foods that Deliveroo deliver, where actually the best way to consume it is to get Deliveroo to deliver it and then bang it in an air fryer for 2 minutes before you eat it.
So this is what Black Bear Burger do?
Right, okay, hit me with this. Yep. I think there must be a way of cooking a pie which is air fry for a bit, microwave for a bit.
So we were talking about this.
Okay.
So basically they were getting loads of, the downside of the street food things, you get the fast feedback. But then when you bugger it off to Deliveroo, is you're inherently, just because of just everything that can go wrong, traffic, blah, 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 is you get your customer complaints go through the roof. So what happened is their burgers, people eating their burgers, like these burgers are absolutely delicious. The burger's great, but the chips are fucked. The chips come soggy.
Yes.
You have them in the restaurant, they're crispy. And so they sort of got, again, fast feedback.
Put the chips in a box, have the instructions.
Well, they said, like, this is the 2 ways to make our chips as close as that you're going to get them to a restaurant. It goes, option 1, take them out, put on tray, air fryer X.
Yes.
So this way, they don't say microwave. They say, don't put in the microwave.
No,
and then they say, whack in the oven for the thing. And it's just, but what they do is they put it on the packaging.
Brilliant.
So it's so clever because like, they've already sort of dealt with that objection before it's arisen. And
there's a very interesting finding, actually, from, I think it was Pizza Hut delivery, who found that by far the biggest determinant of customer satisfaction was actually the heat of the food. How hot the pizza was actually a bigger determinant of satisfaction than how tasty it was. And so, people obviously have some sort of delivery heuristic, which is, or takeaway heuristic, which is this is really hot, so it's great. So therefore, you have a huge opportunity, I think, to hugely reduce customer dissatisfaction with delivery. And the air fryer is your friend, because unlike an oven, it doesn't take 20 minutes to heat up.
Yeah.
And actually, it also is very, very good in the sense that it crisps things and heats the outside, whereas a microwave tends to heat things from the inside out. Because, of course, the middle of something is more insulated. The microwave applies energy evenly, but the inside is more insulated than the outside, so that you tend to make it hot in the middle and soggy on the outside, whereas what you want is the opposite.
So I think, yes, what M&S should do, the M&S wings I get a lot, the big sort of circular thing of wings. Now, wings, in my opinion, have to be crispy. If they're not crispy, they're fucking rank. But if you were to say, put these in the air fryer, because someone's whacking in the oven and they're just not...
No.
It's almost like the air fryer needs to be called the crisper-fire or something like that.
They shouldn't have called it the air fryer because it's nothing to do with frying.
Yeah.
But it's worth noting, of course, they were massive in Asia, where frying is cooking. Okay, I mean, a lot of Asian households wouldn't have an oven in the sense that we do.
Yeah.
We have rather ridiculous ovens because they're designed for like an enormous turkey. They're designed for a kind of cooking that we do either once a week or once a year, depending on the household. And consequently, they're environmentally, they use a lot of energy and they take a long time to heat up. The air fryer is actually a bit of a way of saving the planet because it's a much more efficient energy use. But no, I think that, by the way, we must fight this malicious lie that an air fryer is just a small convection oven. Yes, notionally, it shares parts in common, but the way it operates by super circulating air.
What would you call it? 'Cause I read a thing the other day saying, I thought it was, I don't know where I read it, but it was like artificial intelligence needs a rebrand because it's scaring everyone. It needs to be called co-intelligence. I don't know whether I agree with that, but I thought it was interesting.
There is a phrase that someone's borrowed, which is augmented. People have started using things like augmented intelligence.
What would you rebrand the name of the air fryer?
Well, it's a bit late for that. To be absolutely honest, I wouldn't start from scratch. But I was conscious of the fact, and I used to say this to air fryer manufacturers, look, when I go into a shop, the air fryers are always placed in the kind of cookery section in the same place as the deep fat fryers, which is a complete mistake because the kind of people who would buy an air fryer would probably not want to buy a deep fat fryer and wouldn't be in that section of the supermarket to begin with. And that was a bad context.
Yeah.
And the word fryer effectively, to the kind of bourgeois middle class, suggested a kind of food they didn't eat.
It lowers their
by the way, everybody loves fried food.
Yeah.
Who was it who made the brilliant observation? It might have been Nassim Taleb. No, it was Rob Henderson who said that rich people's food looks better than it tastes and poor people's food tastes better than it looks.
Oh, yes. So good. I wanted to ask you about this. So from that Undoing Project book, which is brilliant, I sort of picked up from that. It's almost like we have Premier League football. The Middle East have like psychology. It's like I've got a list here. Like you've got Daniel Kahneman, Israel, Amos Tversky, Israel, Nassim Taleb, Lebanon, Gad Saad, Lebanon, Yuval Harari, Israel, Mogul, Egyptian. Why do you think, like this is kind of, we'll bring this back to food in a sec, why do you think that part of the world, and this is not a fucking political podcast or anything like that, it's a food podcast, but just purely curious, like why do you think they're so obsessed with psychology and you get the best psychologists and most interesting ideas out of that part of the world?
Yeah, I mean, you can add Jesus as well.
Yeah, exactly.
In the sense that I always say that, this slightly annoys my wife, when I say Jesus was a behavioural scientist.
Because
if you look at things like the parable of the lost sheep, okay, that's actually explaining loss aversion. Quite a lot of the parables in the New Testament are actually very interesting psychological experiments. For example, the parable of the vineyard, where the people who turn up late to work are paid the same as the people who turned up first thing in the morning, and they perceive it as unfair. Okay, that's actually, in a sense, the product of someone. Aesop, okay, that's Greece, so a little bit further west. I think he was in Greece. He was definitely Greek. Aesop is a behavioural scientist, pure and simple.
Aesop.
The fables, things like the fox and the grapes, sour grapes, the boy who cried wolf.
Oh, boy,
okay.
Yeah.
All of those little stories, which date back to, it's like the 7th or 6th century BC.
Yeah.
And they're all fantastic insights into, human emotional response to real-world stimuli.
What are some of those lessons from those fables?
So, I mean, the fox and the grapes is an example where...
What happens in the fox and the grapes?
So the fox can't reach the grapes and walks away deciding they're kind of sour. And that's where it comes from, sour grapes. I can't have it, so I pretend I don't want it. Okay, that's where the phrase, there's a concomitant phrase called sweet lemons, which is bad things that happen to us inevitably that we decide, like my 3 years I spent in Leavenworth Penitentiary were really formative. Okay, so we're forced to go through an experience we don't want, and we reframe it in our memory as something that had positive effects.
Yeah.
Okay, or we can't have something we want, so we decide effectively that we didn't want it all along. That's the sour grapes thing. Well, those grapes, I mean, they were probably horrible anyway. Okay, now that would be an example of the human brain practicing regret minimization. In other words, there's an interesting thing in regret minimization in consumer psychology, which is great phrase. There was someone working for Littlewoods years ago who told me this, and I suddenly realised she was absolutely right. She said, "You never regret your extravagances," and part of the reason for that is if you've spent a lot of money on something, okay, it is more important for you for your own mental well-being to believe that it was money well spent. And so we tend to enjoy performances of more when we've paid quite a lot for the ticket. Okay. It's very hard to go away from a Taylor Swift concert going, well, that was shit, wasn't it? Okay.
I did that all the time. I just done that in Ibiza. I stupidly spent way too much money, and then I was just like, you only live once.
Do you go to those funny clubs where everybody goes woo? And I don't understand that.
I'd love to see you in a rave in Ibiza.
It makes no sense to me whatsoever. Absolutely zero.
Did you go raving in Ibiza, Rory?
No, I went and there was annoying background noise. I remember that you simply opened... I was trying to sit on the balcony.
Whereabouts did you stay?
I was staying in the Ibiza Grand Hotel for a marketing conference, and there was a lot of noisy activity going on.
Is that in Playa d'en Bossa?
No, that's in Ibiza, the main town. Not the old town, but it's just down by the marina, effectively.
Yeah. The Grand Palladium. I think that was 2 doors down.
For the first few days, I stayed in Portonatch, which is right at the other end of the island, and it was absolutely lovely.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. I was just in an Airbnb there with my wife, and we had a fantastic time. And then we went into town, which was very, very interesting. And
what was interesting about Ibiza?
Anthropologically, it was kind of interesting because to me, it's very, very weird. I mean, I don't like, to be honest, I'm slightly claustrophobic. Yeah. So the idea of going into, and also I'm too right-wing to take E. Yeah. This idea of just loving everybody indiscriminately strikes me as just, it's a step too far. I want a drug where you sit in the corner making snarky comments about the people on the next table. I don't want a drug where you're suffused with indiscriminate love for your fellow man.
I'd love to see you in the DC-10 smoking area. I think human nature.
But no, I mean, the whole thing about you never regret your extravagances. Richard Thaler, the behavioural economist, who was a pupil of Daniel Kahneman's, makes the point that if you buy a new pair of shoes and they kind of hurt when you first wear them, the degree to which you persevere with the pain is proportionate to the amount of money you've spent on the shoes.
Yeah,
you see what I mean?
So
it's a kind of sunk cost thing.
I spent 300 quid on this pair of running shoes.
Oi, oi, I am delighted to announce that the most banging kebab on planet Earth has just joined Uber Eats. Bababoom. It's banging. It's literally vavavoom for your taste buds. I smash the sweet potato almost on the reg. The chicken kebabs are insane. I go to the one in Battersea Rise a lot. Loads of my mates in Clapham just smash it all the time. And they've also got one out east in Stratford. And look, don't say I don't treat you. If you use the code BOOMDAN40, you're going to get 40% off when you spend 20 quid or more. So yeah, please do that if you want some banging kebabs. And if you're a restaurant who's looking for an amazing delivery partner, then hit me up. Our partnership with Uber Eats, we can do some sick things behind the scenes. So please reach out. Thank you so much.
Spent 300 quid on this pair of running shoes. So I'm the sort of person who needs to buy something really expensive to then get into it.
Yeah, no, that's actually...
Is that a thing?
Expensive kit as a commitment device isn't crazy.
Yeah, but then I have to buy more kits. It's kind of a self-downward spiral. But I was like, this is fucked. And so I ended up buying more and more blister plasters.
Yes.
But then I was like, this is crazy. And these shoes would have promised me that I was going to sort of run on water. And it was, but I kept persevered. Eventually I fucked them off. But actually, I think that's one of the, like, I'd love to know the sort of the psychology of this, is if you ever go to a running shop where they put you on the treadmill, I think it's the biggest load of bullshit in the world. They basically put you on a treadmill, have a camera, and they watch the way your feet go like this. And then they basically come back with this fucking magical report as if they're sort of...
There is something weird about running in symmetry, because I know that evolutionary biologists, people like Robert Trivers, have done a lot of work, which is that very successful Jamaican sprinters have extraordinarily high bodily symmetry. So at the very top level, it probably does make some difference in terms of how you do those things.
But if it's a couch to 5k punter, then it's kind of. But anyway, they put me on this machine, and they've kind of, I'd done all the commitments, sort of, I'd committed to it, and then they're like, So anyway, I'd spent so much money on the shoes that I kept running in them to the point where my heels were just kind of bleeding. So we're talking about Ibiza, and you said the Old Town was.
Oh, no, it's a wonderful place.
Yeah.
In that, I found the food... By the way, I mean, Spain is kind of overtaking Italy as a foodie destination. I mean, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Partly, I think, because... the one thing I will diss, I think a paella is just a failed biryani. So I'm not going to forgive them on that. I regard that as entirely overrated. But the extent to which they're innovating in Spanish food is absolutely fascinating. It's a wonderful place to go to for that reason. I was also surprised, it's a bizarre thing, but there was a whole street in Madrid full of Indian restaurants. I can't remember what it's called, the Avenida or something like that. But literally like 25 Indian restaurants all in the same street. And we went and actually had an extremely good.
Same thing happened to me in Lisbon. One of the best curries of my life in Lisbon.
Now, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, if you're in Spain, I don't know if this is true in Lisbon, but you've got to go, they spot the fact that you're a Brit, and they basically, muy picante, they ramp up the spice levels.
Yeah.
Because, French people will be hospitalised by a chicken korma, and so they recognise that you're a Brit and you have a higher tolerance, and they do actually ramp that up a bit. And they're actually rather grateful for the opportunity to do so, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very British thing. I did that the other day in a curry house in Wandsworth about like getting a normal dish and then asking for it. I basically ordered a normal dish and asked for Vindaloo spice, and it blew my fucking head off. I was sweating my tits off in this restaurant.
Quite a good one for the yin and yang is a methi, which is heavy and fenugreek. And you have a methi, but you ramp up the heat level, and you get that kind of yin and yang effect of the cooling effect of the fenugreek combined with the high chili level. That can be absolutely fantastic.
I listened to the Rest is History podcast with a professor who specialised in Italian food. Mm-hmm. He was saying our perception of Italian food over the years has changed, because apparently back in the day it was more like curry. It was very spicy. We had more sort of curry dishes. This is what the guy says on the podcast. And then he says then you had like...
Oh, did it blandify it for overseas markets or something?
Well, they said the rise of America. And actually the way we sort of learn Italian food is the sort of the back and forth between Italy and America. So like mum as meatballs and non as lasagnas is it's totally American, and it's not actually Italian dishes. It's kind of dishes that went to New York.
There's also an author in Italian food who says that most of the Italian staples, which we assume are age old, we assume that something like lasagna has been passed down through hundreds of years of kind of peasant, law, and word of mouth from mother to daughter, etc. Stretching. And there's an Italian who did the research into this and found they're basically from the 1950s. Okay, right? It's kind of like they conceived. In other words, there's a kind of post-war thing where they basically had to reinvent cuisine from scratch. By contrast, I had to review for The Spectator, being an advertising guy, when it was their 10,000th anniversary edition. The Spectator is the oldest continuously published magazine in the English language. And I just have to remember the date, it's 1820-something it started. And they asked me to review advertising, through the ages, through the pages of The Spectator. And one absolutely fascinating thing was, way back, because the first Indian restaurant, usually argued it's Veeraswamy, but it wasn't. There was some weird earlier Indian restaurant in the UK, which doesn't exist anymore, but Veeraswamy is, I think, 1903. And it might be 1923. But I assumed that Indian restaurant was a recent arrival to the UK. Now, in restaurant terms, it absolutely was. Yeah. Okay. But if you look at the pages of The Spectator in the 19th century, it's absolutely packed with advertisements for Indian spices, condiments, etc. And I thought, this is really odd, I wasn't expecting this. And then I realised, of course, it was people returning from the Raj, okay? And you'd spent 20... Well, basically English colonial officers who'd been effectively out in the empire as a kind of senior civil servant in, Hyderabad, whatever. Mm-hmm. And they'd done 20 or 30 years, and they'd retired back to England. And suddenly, after having 30 years of Indian food, they faced the rest of their life being spent eating kind of boiled mutton and overcooked vegetables. And they were clearly going insane. And so The Spectator, the purveyors of spices and general condiments and Indian stuff, in the UK. The restaurant scene was comparatively late. The actual home cooking scene, clearly, particularly among a kind of, formerly expat niche, seems to have been absolutely massive. I'd love someone to do more research on that, actually.
Yeah. Yes, it's almost like before the restaurants were created, or began to get going, there's almost this... I suppose that may have helped with the sort of the proliferation of it going so quickly. It was already sort of... The seeds were planted in these little households where they're used to the flavours. One thing I wanted to ask you is, and then we'll apply this to restaurants, is... So Daniel Kahneman, who's sort of the founding father, would you say, of... Well, actually, first, what's the difference between...
Aesop is the first.
Yeah, but then, so what's the difference between behavioural economics and behavioural science?
Okay.
First question.
They're all branches of psychology, and Kahneman was in fact not an economist, he was a psychologist. He won the Nobel Prize for economics, which was a little bit of a case of economics in a sense jumping on someone else's bandwagon to claim the credit. He would have shared it undoubtedly with Amos Tversky, but you can't...
He was dead, wasn't
he? He was dead, you can't get a Nobel Prize posthumously. And effectively, they're all they're subsets of psychology.
Right,
okay?
yeah.
And they're also, in a way, possibly necessary but slightly dishonest attempts to rebrand psychology. And the reason is, I think it's Richard Thaler who said, the President of the United States can reasonably have a Council of Economic Advisors. But you couldn't have a Council of Psychological Advisors. I don't know why, but for some reason, economics is considered a kind of, erroneously, a hard science, and therefore it's acceptable to take the advice of an economist before you introduce some piece of government policy. Far less acceptable to take the advice of a psychologist. Go figure. Why? Well, I have theories about that, which is that people are looking for what you might call numerical proof of their course of action. And they would rather have an entirely spurious economic justification, which allows them to present that as an optimization problem, than introduce softer sciences, which would introduce a degree of ambiguity, which would require them then to make a decision. Okay, so that's my personal theory.
Yep.
But in some ways, it's a fair point. If I went into the finance function, I'm very friendly with quite a few finance people at Ogilvy. If I go to them and say, hey, let's talk about psychology, they're probably going to feel a bit awkward and shuffle off. Whereas if I go and say, I've read an interesting paper on behavioural economics, people in the, what you might call those more left-brain departments, because it's got the word economics in it, will immediately feel that they have to pay it serious attention.
It's a bit like the air fryer, isn't it? It's like you need to sort of have a little...
No. What's your cool thing?
Yeah,
I do know him and really, really like and revere him, so I hope he'll forgive me for saying this. But I think marketing is much, much more important in reality than we tend to acknowledge. And I always say, I'm a huge fan of Octopus Energy, okay? And I always think there's a parallel universe in which they decided to call themselves greentech.com, okay? And they didn't have a pink octopus as a logo. And in that parallel universe, they've got 30,000 customers, okay? I think how things are framed, how they're perceived, what the frame of comparison is, whether you feel something's expensive or cheap, partly depends on the price. But far more, it actually depends. Price, as I would say, to economists, price is a number. To consumers, price is a feeling. Okay, the same thing can feel expensive or feel cheap, entirely dependent on your what you might call on context, mental context, environmental context. If you go into Sunglass Hut or a premium sunglass retailer, a £70 pair of sunglasses will seem extraordinarily cheap. If you go into Boots, it will seem insanely expensive.
Yeah, that's anchoring, isn't it, right?
The anchoring's kind of a sort of subdivision.
One thing I've read you say is like we need ideas. It's not the idea; it's actually the selling of the idea, which is important. And I've got into this ice bath thing, right? And I think it's kind of my morning routine.
I was talking to Jimmy Carr last night, and he's into this thing where you go into a sauna and then jump into a.
Yeah, so mine's a bit of an oxymoron because I'll jump into the ice bath for 3 minutes and then have a cigarette afterwards. So it's like kind of like
yin and yang. Okay.
I'm doing the breath work in and then.
Did you have an ice bath at home? What did you do?
Well, this is what I'm saying. It's just what these guys have done. It's so clever. They've basically sold me a fucking paddling pool, right? Which is you basically pump it up yourself. Yeah. They've packaged it as this is an ice bath which does all this stuff for your mental health, your well-being.
Is this a place up in London in Mayfair or somewhere like that?
So basically what's happened is these high status gyms and these high status people like Andrew Huberman.
They've sold you an unheated paddling pool.
Unheated paddling pool, right?
Yeah.
Which you fill up yourself. It's kind of mucky. It's got like a little thing you honk onto the side of it. You can set. But I'm like, and actually, is it getting? It must be. The selling of this idea is so good that people are willing to put themselves in that much discomfort.
Let's be really brutal here, right? Okay. Sushi. If sushi weren't Japanese, okay, and you were shown a documentary where these, effectively, these Brazilian or Somalian hunter-gatherers, were forced to eat raw fish wrapped up in rice inside a leaf. Your natural reaction would be, poor fuckers, I hope that never happens to me, right? Okay, but you make it Japanese, and the entire way in which we perceive it. There's a brilliant thing, which I'm going to start this tradition, okay, where podcast guests get to plug things, because I don't think the podcast hosts should have exclusive rights over over influencer marketing. There's a place in Santa Fe, New Mexico, just outside I think it's called 10,000 Waves, and it's a Japanese spa. And you go in, typically in a group, and you have this kind of interesting kind of bath thing, and you wear a kind of weird robe, and there are lots of tatami mats dotted around the place. And it's one of the most enjoyable days I've ever spent in my life. I went with my whole family, and we took a room, okay, and it was fantastic. And then it occurred to me that if it weren't Japanese, I would have thought, this is a really ridiculous thing. I'm basically paying to use a gigantic bath with some wood stuff around, okay? But because it's Japanese, a huge amount of the mental groundwork in getting me to accept it has already been done. And consequently, I think there are a lot of things, okay, which are unbelievably marketing dependent, and we never realise they are.
Such as?
Well, I mentioned sushi, which is if it weren't Japanese, if you were told that impoverished African peasants were wrapping up raw fish in bits of rice and leaf. Okay, that would probably have had vastly less appeal. And miso soup is the most extreme case, okay? Which, I mean, Heinz would never have launched miso soup, would they? Because they would have done a bit of research and people would have said it's disgusting and there's a weird leaf in it. What the hell are you talking about? Why do you think? Well, because it's Japanese, we think it has sort of age-old, venerable qualities, and it has cleansing properties and all that kind of thing. So the extent to which we're capable of actually objectively evaluating anything, right, seems to me pretty limited. And then when people get angry about marketing and say it's manipulating people, and it's taking things that people don't need and making them more attractive. Yeah, it's probably true, quite a lot of things. On the other hand, I said, let's look at the best idea that anybody's ever had in world history, which in terms of its outcome is probably smallpox vaccination, Edward Jenner. I mean, we can all have an argument about this, okay? You can mention the steam engine, okay? But I would probably say that if you exclude religion, which probably had hugely beneficial effects, maybe tea as well, but had huge effects in allowing people to cohabit in more densely populated areas, okay? But smallpox vaccination, undoubtedly, up there in the top 10. Now, we always assume, naively, don't we, when we look at history, with the benefit of hindsight, that Edward Jenner has this insight that dairymaids don't get smallpox. And the theory is that because they've been infected with cowpox first, which gives them immunity to smallpox while being a much, much milder strain, therefore it's a good idea to infect yourself deliberately with cowpox. And therefore, completely, not completely, but very, very reliably then remove the risk of smallpox. Now that means that, one of your children doesn't die and two of them aren't unpleasantly disfigured. It's an unbelievably important idea, okay? You'd think, wouldn't it? People go, well, Ted, you've really cracked this one. God, we've been looking for a cure for that for ages. Thanks for that. We're all going to vaccinate our kids. Did people do that? Did they bollocks? Jenner had to spend his whole life basically arguing his case. And the marketing breakthrough, I think, I need someone to check this, okay? The marketing breakthrough was probably getting the king to vaccinate his own children. Because the king was the supreme social media influencer.
Yeah, he's the high status.
The high status person who other people imitate. And a lot of people, not unreasonably, took the heuristic, which is that if the king, who's extremely well advised, is making this decision, yes, I'm just wondering which king it would have been. If the king's doing this, it's probably okay for me.
Yeah, David Beckham does it.
David Beckham. Well, funny enough, there's a brilliant instance, which a friend of mine called Michael Liebreich, who's a very brilliant environmental investor and skeptic. And he's not skeptic about climate change, he's just skeptical about a lot of the proposed solutions to it. He sent me a wonderful thing which showed that the polio vaccine, which was incredibly important, we forget that because none of us can remember anybody. Actually, I had a great aunt who'd had polio as a child. So I'm as a 58-year-old, I'm in the last sort of generation or two of people who actually have experience of someone who had polio. The big breakthrough was they got Elvis to have a polio vaccine live on the Ed Sullivan Show. Fairly early in his career, there's footage of it, there's a brilliant article in, I think, New York Magazine or The New Yorker, and it was an incredible breakthrough where effectively Elvis on stage is basically being injected with a polio vaccine on TV.
Yeah.
And so those things, really, really sodding brilliant ideas require marketing. Air fryers, okay? Once you bought one, you never went back. I don't know anybody who bought an air fryer. Well, no, that's not quite true. There are always 5% of people who go, oh, I don't get the point, or I don't understand it, okay? There'll always be that. But basically, everybody who bought an air fryer goes, okay, changed my life, brilliant, okay? Doesn't mean you didn't have to spend 15 years persuading people of this. It's not like people have this instantaneous, perfect conception of what will be valuable to them in the future. Because most people live their lives through defaults. And the default settings are habit, okay, and social copying. Do what I did before, do what everybody else does.
Yeah, what are some, because we've talked a lot about sort of anchoring, context, price. I think you said price is feeling. What are some of these variables people can press or press down or lean into that can get potentially not great ideas to spread? And I think let's maybe use, like, say we were trying to create like a Polish food, right? For example.
Yeah.
Polish food isn't big in the UK. Polish food is probably like Korean food 20 years ago, whereas Korean food now is getting bigger and bigger.
Although they're very good at running British cafes, of course, because it's a sort of similar. If you're doing a kind of
similar sort
bacon
of,
and eggs, egg and chips.
Say you were trying to create like a Polish Nando's, right? So it's like people start. I don't know. What sort of food do? They do like lots of sausage.
You probably have to have a hero item, don't you?
Yes. How would you do that? Is basically.
It's a really, really good question. Yeah. Sorry. No. Now, one thing you can do, which I think is one of the central insights, although there are many from Will Guidara's book, is effectively, it's called unreasonable hospitality, and he argues that in the hospitality industry in general, one very good strategy. Now, it'd be very easy to misunderstand this strategy by saying you can be shit at everything so long as you're brilliant at one thing. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that there is a certain component of your offering which has to be unreasonably good. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I always thought it was fascinating. There's a fascinating hotel chain, which I often talk about, because I think it's just interesting psychologically, which is the Moxie hotel chain. I don't know if you've ever stayed in one.
Where are they? Like?
Okay, they're all over the place. They're in pretty good locations. The rooms are tiny. The rooms are extremely basic. There's no laundry. There's no room service. I think there's a kind of ironing room. There might be a laundry room, but there's an ironing room. There's no actual laundry. They're not intended for you to stay there for a week. They're intended for 1, 2, maybe 3 night stays.
Yeah.
And the rooms are actually smaller than you get in a travel lodge. They've got a very good TV. They've got very good Wi-Fi. The bed's very comfortable. It's all quite modern and minimalist, but they're small. Okay. The location is good, generally, and it can be because the rooms are small. And the entire differentiation is the ground floor, which is kind of like a 24-hour barista-run coffee bar, serving also alcoholic drinks, sometimes serving food. There's a little shop. There are a load of desks, chairs. It's a bit like an ad agency, basically, the ground floor. And you can hang out there. So you don't mind that your room's so small, because you can basically hang out on the ground floor, invite friends around to join you if you want to. When you check in, you don't check in at a check-in desk, you check in at the bar. And they typically, I don't want to overpromise here, but most of the time they offer you a welcome cocktail, which is their signature cocktail of the day, which is generally delicious. And so you drink that and you check in and you go up and dump your stuff in the room. And then you don't sit in your room with your laptop like a sado, as you would do in most hotels. Okay? The ground floor is basically, it even has lockers. Okay, so you can lock your laptop in the ground floor if you wanted to. You basically sit down, get your laptop out on the ground floor, order a really good coffee, charge it to your room. Maybe you have a cocktail, maybe you have a pizza. But for anybody, to be honest, I'm probably way too old for their target demographic, but it still appeals to me what they're doing, which is make everything basic, acceptable, and decent, and have one thing that's remarkable.
So say that was Polish food, what would that be?
Would you start with a crossover product, which is like the Polish bacon sandwich, the Polish version of, I know I'm obsessed with this idea of bacon sandwich as a restaurant, because the bacon roll or bacon sandwich...
You go to the restaurant Bangers?
So that's a sausage restaurant, is it?
Yeah. Basically, it's kind of is what you were saying. But they don't have the champagne and they don't have the brown sauce, which is what we
No,
talked about.
and that would be interesting. And then you probably have one killer. Maybe you start with something crossover, which is kind of this is where Raymond Levy, the designer, called it Maya, which is maximally advanced yet acceptable. So you take people, if you like, you allow them to keep one foot in the familiarity camp while putting another foot into the experimental side. So you may raid Polish cuisine, which is not something I know a huge amount about.
Yeah, neither do I.
There's a very good Polish restaurant.
Like a schnitzel burger would be an example of, was it Mayer?
Yeah, Mayer would be exactly that.
Yeah.
A schnitzel burger would be exactly that kind of thing, which is both Mayer's maximally advanced yet acceptable, and it comes from the idea of product design, which is you want something to be as good as it possibly can be without making it so different to what preceded it that people can't get their heads around the idea.
Yes, with you.
Now, that doesn't always seem to be the case, because there are weird things like bubble tea, which seem to come from absolutely nowhere. I guess it's Korean.
Kombucha.
Kombucha came from virtually nowhere, right? I met someone, I have to confess this, which is I met someone about 12 or 14 years ago who was, I think, Russian and had this idea of making kombucha a thing in the UK. I remember listening and half of me thinking she was completely mad because I thought, I'm not sure people are ready for fermented cold tea. Now, interestingly, John Evans, who you ought to interview, who's the marketing director of Britvic, he made Lipton's cold iced tea a big success against all the odds because all research and all his colleagues told him there was no way that a hot tea drinking country like the UK would actually have an appetite for cold tea.
How do you do it?
So it's worth noting. So I did say to him that a little bit of the appeal of cold tea is possibly rather like Starbucks in a can or Red Bull is that sometimes we're just too lazy to make a cup of coffee. We want a bit of a perk, but we're either too time-starved or we're in a car, okay? And we just haven't got time or the energy to make a cup of coffee. So an instant caffeinated drink is going to have some appeal anyway, simply on the grounds of laziness. But you can promote these things, and what becomes popular? I think market research, conventional market research, is probably not a very reliable guide to what becomes popular because if you'd ask people, would you like bubble tea? Most people will go, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard of. And of course, what the research doesn't capture is that when there are lots of places serving bubble tea, people's own curiosity and social proof goes, this seems to be a thing, I'd better find out what it is, okay? It's not the same as researching something in the abstract, which I think can be dangerously misleading because, none of the, Dyson, I always say Dyson, Red Bull, Nespresso, none of those things would actually have succeeded in research in advance of their own existence. But so some things do spring out of nowhere, but I mean, that one way of trying it is, as you said, the schnitzel burger.
What else would you do? What other levers would you push on? We could maybe talk about context. We could talk about, I think one of the ways you'd get high status chefs like your Gordon Ramsay to say, oh, this new Polish schnitzel place is amazing. Like, what other levers would you press to get that idea to spread so we end up with like 100 Polish Nando's sites?
You might want to cheat a bit, okay, and go a bit Eastern European and include Hungarian things like, cherry soup.
Cherry soup?
In a bowl. Hungarian, fantastic.
What,
soup made of cherries.
What's it, savoury or sweet?
It's kind of, you generally put a bit of cream or sour cream, I think, in it. It's a long time since I've had it, because I last had it in Hungary, which was bloody years ago.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could get it if you went to is the Gay Hussar still there? I wonder if that's closed down. That used to be the sort of left-wing restaurant par excellence in London, the Gay Hussar in Soho, back in the sort of 70s and 80s. That's where Labour politicians typically went to eat. You might want to cheat a bit because no one actually knows, okay, what's authentically Polish and what isn't. So there's no reason you couldn't borrow from neighbouring cuisines and get away with it.
Well, you can almost apply the Pan-Asian to the Pan-Eastern Europe. You go to those Pan-Asian places, it's actually a hodgepodge of Korean, then you have bao, then you have sushi, and it's just a cornucopia of different Asian cuisines. I think that's clever because that brings, as you say, you're borrowing from slightly different areas. That brings people into the Eastern European category versus just the Polish category.
And then there's a question of, to what extent does fish play in the whole thing? You've got a whole load of questions going on there, okay? But it would be... it's a very interesting point, which is maybe That's a bit of an uphill challenge because Polish food doesn't have, Eastern European food, with the exception of Hungarian, generally doesn't have a fantastic reputation, which may be nothing to do with the quality of their cuisine, but simply because they, while they were part of the Warsaw Pact, okay, there was probably a general deterioration in food, in the standards of kind of culinary innovation.
We'll go back to that. So we'll continue on that thread. I want to ask you about defining Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 as personality.
They're metaphors, just to be clear.
He
said that
he
himself.
said that. I listened to the talk you did with him, I think it was at the IOD, a long time ago.
Institute of Practitioners in Advertising was the idea.
Yeah. And I would love to talk about, firstly define System 1 and System 2 and their personalities. Then also I would love to understand how those two things are working when I go to fucking Chipotle, right? So I go to Chipotle and they get me in with this £8.50. And then I've got I either go chicken or pork and I'm going along. And I think that's almost like the system 2 working. It's like, which one do I go for? And then suddenly they're like, extra chorizo. And I'm like, yeah, extra guacamole, yeah. And before I know it, so I spent 15 quid. So I'd love to know, first define System 1, then System 2, and then how does that work when I'm in Chipotle?
The metaphor is, it's very simple, and I would argue...
It's not a system, is it? It's what he says.
His argument is that there are processes like what's 2 plus 2, he always gave this example, and that's basically, you don't have to think about it, you just go 4. And that's, so an example of something that's very System 1 would be nearly everything you do while you're driving. The vast majority of what you do while you're driving a car is basically instinctively driven. You're not consciously thinking, there is a right turn ahead, therefore I will need to turn the steering wheel shortly. You fundamentally trained your brain to make driving, for the most part, autonomic. Now, you might argue driving in a city like London, why people hate all those 20-mile-an-hour limits, okay, is that a process that was once basically autonomic, and you could basically go, I'm in a city now, I better not go too fast, and 30 miles an hour seemed about right, okay, suddenly now you're having to pay attention consciously to a load of things which once you could actually take for granted. Okay, so and the most extreme sort of System 1 form of driving is that weird feeling where you suddenly realise you have no memory of driving for the last 10 minutes. You've been lost in a kind of dream world, and meanwhile your body and eyes have been driving the car, and you assume you haven't actually hit anyone or anything. Okay, because that would have actually snapped you back into attention, I hope. Okay. But we've all had those moments, okay? If you're a frequent driver, if you're an infrequent driver, probably when you first get into a car, driving is System 1. It's mirror, signal, manoeuvre, clutch. Sorry, you're right, it's System 2.
Yeah.
When you first get into a car, when you're first learning to drive, when you're first learning to ride a bicycle, it's System 2. And through repetition and a kind of automation, it gets effectively, transferred to, metaphorically, System 1. And an awful lot of the activities of System 1 occur, effectively they're opaque to inspection. They occur below the level of consciousness.
Yep.
Okay. So my drive to the station this morning to go to Watford, I wasn't really... there were several moments at which I made conscious interventions. Like, ooh, look, there's a car ahead, so I'll slow down so the car has passed the cyclist before I get there. That might have been kind of semi-consciously thought out. Mm-hmm. It might not be. You might just, I imagine if you're a taxi driver or a professional driver, it becomes even more kind of automated. But the point being that a large part of our activity, and people always quote weird figures like 95% of our decisions are unconscious. I'm not sure you can realistically put a percentage on that. But I don't think it's unreasonable to assert that a very large proportion of decisions we make are either unconscious or under the influence of unconscious processes. So an example would be in choosing from Chipotle.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Just quickly, what's System 2 for listeners, and then we'll go into...
So system 2, okay, so 2 plus 2, for most people who are vaguely mathematically literate, is 4. Nobody has to think about it. Whereas 13 times 12, which I think is 156... you actually have to give that a little bit of thought.
Yeah.
Okay? In other words, you might even take out a pen and paper. And so the argument that Kahneman made is that, of course, the System 1 is faster than System 2, and we're not even aware of it in operation. And as a consequence of which... although it's unbelievably valuable and probably essential to our evolutionary survival, Kahneman would argue that sometimes System 1 gets a jump on System 2 and causes us to make a suboptimal decision before we've had time to think about it.
Okay.
So now, by the way, there are lots and lots of cases where making a decision before you've had time to think about it probably saved your life.
Yeah.
Okay, jumping out of the way of a bus because you're standing on the road, you hear a noise, and without actually pausing to think about the consequences of your action, you simply jump to safety. Those kind of behaviours are actually very, very necessary in evolutionary terms to our survival. Kahneman might have argued that in a modern environment where more and more decisions maybe require System 2 thinking, in other words, we actually need to discipline our thought and decision-making processes, that what you might call the path dependency of decision-making, where System 1 gets to make a decision first, may lead to things which are biases or even very bad decisions, okay, simply because effectively our instinctive, heuristically driven, okay, assumptions override what might be the consequence of a more thoughtful interpretation or evaluation of all the evidence. So one very System 1 thing, by the way, I think, is the idea that you get what you pay for. Okay? So the idea when you're in a shop and you're going to Chipotle, and if one thing's more expensive than the other, you'll probably assume it's better. Now, there's no actual evidence for that, okay? I always give this example, which is that if you went to a shop to buy a Bluetooth speaker, and one Bluetooth speaker was bigger than the other, more powerful than the other, and it had more features, but it was also cheaper. Now, to a standard economist, that's the easiest decision in the world. Higher utility, lower price, slam dunk, nothing to see here, no-brainer, buy the cheaper, better speaker, inverted commas, move on. But humans, that would conflict with a human instinct, which is something that's more expensive is probably better in some way. And actually, we find that decision deeply confusing in reality. We go, that's strange, because if I'd actually made a better speaker, this is sort of social intelligence, I'd probably charge more for it. So the fact that this speaker is better and cheaper is now confusing me, and I'm probably not going to buy either of them. So there are a lot of cases where our brain, whether we like it or not, is operating under certain mental assumptions, which are kind of almost in hardware, if you like.
Yeah, so what's happening when I go into Chipotle then? Like, because what, in terms of that decision with the Bluetooth speaker, right?
Yeah.
If I go into Chipotle and I order, say, the chicken with extra chorizo and cheese and guacamole up front, and they say it's 14 quid, but suddenly I'm a bit like, oh, I don't want to do that, right? I'd love to eat it. But then if they get me in with the chicken, right? And they start fucking loading it up. And then as they move the bastard along and they say, right, I want you extra chorizo, 1 quid. Why am I saying yes to that? Why am I saying yes?
It's a sort of sunk cost thing, which is
going on
quite often for these inverted commas biases.
Yeah.
There's actually a phrase that sums it up, which is kind of in for a penny, in for a pound. Okay.
Yeah.
And the point would be, why you spoil the ship for a halfpenny of tar? I'm in here anyway now. I might as well go the whole hog and get the absolute sandwich I want.
Yes.
So in other words, I mean, if you think about it, the whole concept of sides, okay, is very similar to that, which is, okay, you could argue that sides just give people more choice. Yes, that's true. But there is the argument that I've got this main thing. Now, having committed and mentally written off the cost of X, I might as well spend a bit extra to make X even better. So the classic example would be buying a car. Okay, you can't aftermarket fit something like a glass roof, a glass sunroof, or heated steering wheel, or whatever. So when you're buying a car, you think, well, I'm spending a 5-figure sum already. I might as well spend another £3,000 or £4,000 on extras to make this as good as it possibly can be. And because after all, I'll never have another chance again for 4 years. And car makers will make inordinately more margin on optional extras than they will on the base model car.
Yeah. So what you're
other examples.
Once you're in that sunk, once you're sort of that sunk cost thing, or in for a pound, do you think that's basically you're sort of the system one's activated there? Where you're just sort of thinking, fuck it, like I may as well get the roof, I may as well get the extra chorizo.
So I mean, a classic example would be if you turn up at a hotel, and they say you can actually for £50 a night you can upgrade to a suite. Obviously, it depends how long you're staying there to a degree, but you are more likely to go, yeah, fuck it, okay, than you are to buy the suite when at the same time as you're paying for the basic room. And the argument for that is that you've already mentally written off the cost of the room because you've paid that in advance, okay? So I'm in for 200 quid for my 3-night stay or whatever it might be, or 2-night stay. I'm in for that amount of money, and now I can make this experience amazing for just a bit more. And undoubtedly, that is a recurring pattern with marketing pretty much everywhere, okay? I mean, once it's sometimes called in salesmanship the foot in the door thing. If you can get someone to agree to buy something, then either immediately or subsequently getting them to upgrade to a better version of that thing is often easier than selling the better version of that thing from the off. So, okay, a brand that mastered that fantastically, and which has given them a large shareholding by Warren Buffett and an extraordinary level of success, is American Express, where there were a lot of people who probably wouldn't get an American Express gold card off the bat. But if you sold them the green card and then 3 years later said, for only another X pounds a year, okay, their attention is focused on the increment, not on the overall cost. Okay, so your attention when it's do I want to add the chicken, do I want to add the so-and-so, is focused on the incremental cost, not the headline amount.
So, okay, with you. What are other ways to sell ideas, do you think?
Okay, one way is slowly, which is we have to accept the fact, and I think business has this fundamental mistake of tending to think that the returns from innovation are kind of linear. And actually, if you look at significant innovations, what you will see is a kind of sigmoid curve of adoption, where things are... I mean, sushi, I'm old enough to remember when sushi was a pretty niche-y food. The idea of selling sushi in supermarkets, as now happens, okay, would have seemed completely outlandish in 1989 or 1990. Some people liked it, they went to specialist sushi restaurants, they were taken by someone who liked sushi. But the journey that particular food has had is that sigmoid curve where it's very, very slow and grows kind of seemingly linearly, and then it hits a tipping point where adoption accelerates, and then it hits a kind of ceiling, which, depending on what the product may be, with a mobile phone, it was nearly 100%, the ceiling of adoption. Or you might argue in some countries it's actually 105% because people have more than one phone. Okay? But there's also a ceiling beyond which there's no possible future penetration. Or at least the penetration beyond that point is going to be kind of incremental again. It's not going to be exponential. And so it's a very dangerous mistake to start with an idea and assume that because it's not instantly popular that it has no future. By the way, I mean, even the adoption of the iPhone was quite slow to begin with. Okay? If you actually look at volume sales, even products which we tend to look back on and assume were these kind of epiphany products where the iPhones didn't exist, then they invented the iPhone and everybody bought an iPhone. Trust me, it was not like that. I spent a large part of my working life in the late 90s, early 2000s, persuading people, this is under the aegis of BT, persuading people to have internet access at home. Now, okay, to you, me, everybody in the room, that now seems absurd. It seems absurd that you would have to persuade people to buy a mobile phone. I mean, you may have to persuade people to buy one kind of mobile phone rather than another kind of mobile phone, but 97% of people, in that category in some shape or form. There was a period from, I mean, if you go all the way back, there were mobile phones in the 1970s, but they were kind of incredibly niche and insanely expensive. There was a period from the late 1980s, maybe the middle 1980s, late 1980s to probably the early 2000s, where you actually saw mobile phone penetration, maybe a bit later than that, mobile phone penetration effectively went through the population in that sigmoid curve. And you'll probably see that with the adoption of things like solar panels, for example. And electric cars, I suspect, will also follow that pattern. I think the projections for electric car sales were wrong, probably, because they used an extrapolation rather than the understanding that this is not a straight line. And then, by the way, the reason for that is, as I said, if you accept that the two forces acting on human behaviour, the two default modes are habit, I'll do what I did last time. And I think most people who've moved to an electric car will continue to buy electric cars. In fact, the percentage of people who actually revert is way below 10%. Once you've gone electric, you never go back. Okay? Now, the second thing that drives people is social proof, which is they're highly influenced and reassured, if you like, by the behaviour of other people around them. There is, I would argue, a third very strong human default behaviour, which, not among a certain innovative and experimental part of the population who are always trying to do something new, like me. I'm a sucker. I read Stuff magazine. I'm 58 years old. I've just bought one of those Samsung Freestyle projectors, and I'm pissing around with projecting stuff on the ceiling. I'm basically a bit of a dickhead in that I'll try anything that has novelty value. Okay, you may be the same. I don't know. Okay, but other than those people, for whom what you might call having the latest thing forms a significant part of their identity, most people also have a very strong mental thing, which is to construct or reverse engineer a justification for why the old way they did things and which they're currently using is still right, and why the new way is stupid. And so you had massive hostility to mobile phones in the early days, massive hostility, weirdly, to air fryers, slightly less in that case, massive hostility to electric cars, which you see now among petrol car drivers. And that's the kind of thing which is, it's right because I do it, not I do it because it's right. So people have an immense mental capacity for self-serving post-rationalization. Now, in the case of electric cars, there's this weird hostility to the whole thing, okay? Now, by the way, I think that people are right to some degree to be hostile to over-eager government legislation mandating electrification, because I think this is a process that should take place at an organic, natural pace. I also think there are people who should probably never buy an electric car. Okay, there are use cases. People who drive a very small distance, let's say a 78-year-old pensioner who drives to the shops twice a week. Okay, it's a waste of a good battery to electrify those people. Okay, even if they're buying a car from new, you should let them buy a petrol car, because the contribution they're making to global warming is nugatory, and so the benefits of having a battery sitting outside their house may become slightly different as they can detach the battery to the grid and use it as a storage form. But it's a waste of a battery, giving it to someone who drives very, very small mileage. Okay. And so I think opposition to the government, but there's this kind of weird hostility to electric cars, which manifests itself in people being convinced that everybody with an electric car ends up stranded. Literally, I can remember people going, mobile phones are ridiculous, why would I not want to make a telephone call while I'm on the street? Okay? There are people who didn't want the internet at home. Quite often, we had to use an argument when we were selling it for BT that it will help your kids with their schoolwork. So kind of slightly, one very potent argument for people who were identified as being families was you could kind of guilt them into it slightly because their children would be at a disadvantage, conceivably, if they didn't have access to the same resources as other kids.
That's a real clever sort of nuanced... So I sort of get the social proof, the anchoring, those are kind of obvious ones. What are some of these sort of, kind of almost like magic tricks? It's like leaning into, okay, well, you don't want your kids to fall behind because that will make you a bad parent. Like, that's a great...
It's ridiculous that you need to use that argument because people would just assume that a house without internet access is basically uninhabitable.
Alex Hormozy has two great things, which is the pain is the pitch, which I love.
He's brilliant.
Yeah, pain is the pitch, and then just reduce all the risks. So I was speaking to, actually, I don't know if you've met Luke, who's Chris Williamson's business partner at Newtonic, lovely guy. I'm trying to do a festival next year called the Hungry Hooteroonie. I was like, how the fuck am I going to sell Hooteroonie? It's basically like like loads of different food and drink speakers, fountains and stuff. I was like, how the fuck do I sell the tickets? So he was like, well, he told me about Hormozy. He was like, go into the pain, what problem do you solve? And then just reduce the risk. So he's like, if you don't like this festival or this day, I will just give you your money back from my personal account. And I've already gone round to a few people and said that.
David Ogilvy.
And the tickets are just like...
David Ogilvy died slightly annoyed that he always wanted American Express to make the offer, which is, because it was a card with a fee, and still is, which is slightly unusual, he always wanted to make the offer, try the American Express card for a year, and if you're not happy after a year, we'll give you double your money back.
Ooh.
Now, double your money is a real skin in the game proof of confidence.
Yeah.
Okay? What was interesting about that is people said, well, people could rip us off. And David said, let's test this, because two things. My guess is that only a very small percentage of people will actually deliberately get a card so that they can make, what would have been sort of £45 in profit in a year's time, okay? Because you've got to try it for a year first. And they've got to have £45 to begin with. Secondly, yes, some people will do that. You don't want those people as customers in the first place. So it's actually serving a very good purpose of getting rid of arseholes, okay, from your customer base. So
How to get your Challenger brand into more supermarkets and increase your current distribution in half the time. Range reviews are happening right now, right this millisecond. Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Tesco, Ocado, Co-op, all looking for new banging Challenger brands. Don't miss this range review and have to wait another 6 months. It's long. Don't lose precious shelf space to competitors. Don't let your buyer pick another brand just because you didn't have a Grand Slam deck. Northstar Category Management help you create banging supermarket pitch decks so good that buyers find it impossible to say no to. Challenger brands like Perfect 10, Trip, Bulbing Co, Dash, all love Northstar. Look, I'm so confident in Northstar transforming your brand. We've got an exclusive Hungry offer. Your first month for free. Yes, free. Plus, we're going to give you a free 30-minute consultancy session to see how your brand is currently performing in category. Click the link in the show notes to book your consultancy session, and thank you later.
David.
Because what I find interesting about David is he sold. And I asked this, so maybe we can explore this with you.
There is extraordinary wisdom. This is partly what my next book is about. There was a whole generation of ad men of the kind of Don Draper era, Leo Burnett, David Ogilvy, Bill Bernbach.
Yeah, but so with Ogilvy...
And there was extraordinary wisdom and knowledge embedded in that period of advertising. The problem I've got with the advertising industry is it currently has a business model that sells insights one brand at a time, one client at a time. And so it sells insights like bloody Fabergé eggs. Here is an insight which you can have, and it's just for you, and it's really expensive, and you can just have one. And my argument is with, say, the food industry. There are tons of insights, and I want to sell them like Coca-Cola. I don't want to sell them like Fabergé eggs. I want to go, look, if you run a cafe or a bar or a restaurant, exactly your insight about bring the goddamn card machine when you bring the bill, right?
What other insights for restaurants?
One of them would be put tables and chairs outside even if it's raining, because it says from 300 yards away, there's a cafe over there, okay? And it's open, because if it wasn't open, they would have put their tables and chairs inside and locked them away, okay? So it's like a massive neon open sign. Another thing would be, which always interests me, if you look like a cafe, this is just an interesting thought, okay? What's the difference between a cafe and a restaurant? And my theory is this, that in a restaurant, you're obliged to have at least a one-course, possibly two-course meal. In other words, you cannot just have a coffee and a slice of cake. Now, in a cafe, you can upgrade to a fairly large calorific meal, but you're not under an obligation. So if you can do a dishoom and make your restaurant look a bit like a cafe, people will come, they'll come in, and they'll buy one thing, and then they'll decide to buy more.
That's why Caravan...
This is, by the way, it's very... When you're in a foreign country and you can't read the vibes, let's say you're in somewhere like Milan, you can't tell what's a cafe and what's a restaurant. We had this when we were in Madrid, where my wife and I kept fucking up, because there are a load of tables and chairs outside a place, and we sit down and go, can we have a coffee? And they go, are you not having a meal? You filth, fuck off. Okay? Now, one of the reasons why eating out in a foreign country is actually weirdly anxious is you're not entirely clear what the rules are. And now, I'll give you another example. It is amazing how many establishments, while open, are so badly lit, particularly in the British winter, that they look as if they're closed. The dying words of William Sainsbury, the founder of Sainsbury's, I mean literally the dying words before he died, were make sure the stores remain well lit. So there's a lighting question. Yeah. Going into a murky space. Okay. Then there are really interesting questions, like the meaning of things like tablecloths, which were a mandatory for dining out in my childhood, okay, and now may well be off-putting. We've been so wagamamified that if we see tablecloths, we go, it's too fancy, I don't want to go through all that palaver. I'll go to a restaurant which doesn't have tablecloths. So things take on completely different meanings. But what I'm saying is that I think there are universally applicable insights, which you can learn far better than from me, from Alex Hormozy or from Will Guidara. I'm very happy, because they're very, very interesting. Wasn't the pain is the pitch?
Pain is the pitch and reduce the risks were those the two things. Because he featured you in his book, actually, which is a brilliant book. But on the lighting and the all-day thing, have you been to the restaurant Caravan?
No.
Caravan Coffee. So they've been on my podcast.
So where are they?
They've got... they're new...
If you actually kept my diary clear, I can actually find these bloody places. Right? I'd actually have time to go out and explore. Sorry, yeah, go on.
But yes,
okay, in my diary next week, go to Caravan. Right, okay, fine. Sorry, we'll carry
on. So what Laura did was she's the founder. They're Antipodean, New Zealand's better wanky way of saying New Zealand. Is they do
Kiwis, of course. I might be related. I'm not sure. He's called Townsend, and he's a New Zealand coffee entrepreneur who's the guy who arguably invented the flat white.
Yes. So you relate to the guy?
A lot of Townsends in New Zealand are related to me, because I had a great uncle or great uncle who left a large amount of money to something like 8 nephews, about 7 of whom, basically as farmers, took the money and hoofed it to New Zealand. So if you're a Kiwi called Townsend, there's a fairly high likelihood that you're actually a relative of mine. So I've always wanted to establish a relationship with this guy, because Kiwi coffee, of course, is absolutely fascinating.
It's amazing. What she did is, so they really pioneered the all-day dining. So you go there for breakfast in the morning.
Okay, that's a really, really interesting thing which Dishoom discovered is how do you crack the lunch at an Indian restaurant?
You get them in for breakfast.
You open for breakfast.
But what she does is, which is wild, which again, it's kind of a special effects and goes back to my street food is comedy, restaurants and movies.
See, I think one of the things you can make a mistake. You can make a massive mistake doing this. So let me share this with the world's coffee shops and cafes. I am sure that if you open, that for the last half hour, a Costa is open. They don't do all that much business. And it'd be very easy for them to assume, okay, the reason we're not doing much business is there isn't much demand for coffee between 6 and 6:30, therefore there is absolutely no point in us opening later. Now, that's dependent on the assumption that falling demand is due to time of day, not nearest to closing. And my hunch is, people, okay, this is my theory. Okay? And I think it's important for the world's cafes and coffee chains to realise this. People don't like having a coffee in a place that's closing, right? Because you feel under time pressure. This is why all-day dining is so interesting, okay? The time pressure is off-putting. The staff, God, they're going to hate me. They're going to piss in my coffee for revealing this. Okay, oh shit. Every time I now stop at a Nero, someone's going to gob in it. Oh God. Okay, but I'm going to reveal it anyway, okay? The staff don't want customers to come in the last 20 minutes of the day. And this is known in the trade as getting the mop out. All you have to do is provide a very small clue that your closure is imminent, and you don't attract any new customers. Now, partly that may be unintentional, or it may be intentional on the part of the staff, because they want to clean the muck off the cappuccino machine, the frother, and they want to mop down the toilets, and they want to wipe down the tables, so they can piss off as soon as the coffee shop closes. And that may be the fault of coffee shops for not paying overtime. I don't know the economics well enough, right? So what people do, either unintentionally or intentionally, is they do this thing called getting the mop out. All you have to do is take one chair and put it upside down on top of a table, and no one else will come into your coffee shop, because they don't want to be the last customer of the day, and they don't want to consume anything under time pressure, and they don't want to look unwelcome, and they don't want to come in and be told, no, I'm sorry, we're closed. Okay, now Woolworths used to be very clever. They used to actually open for 5 minutes after their official opening time. So they never have this problem of people turning up and being told, sorry, we're closed. And they
used to open
Woolworths would say, we close at 5:30, and they actually close at 5:35. Every single business should do this, because if you allow someone into a shop and then give them second-rate service because you're basically thinking about how you get home rather than how you sell someone a coffee, you've created a pissed-off customer. Now, what is happening, okay, is in the half hour before a coffee shop closes, they are basically deliberately or accidentally or inadvertently manifesting signs that new customers not welcome. And it could be a mop, getting the mop out. It could be putting a single chair upside down on top of the table, or taking two chairs and putting one upside down on top of the other. Effectively, that is a massive turn-off to any prospective customers. So the fall-off in sales between 5:30 and 6 may be nothing to do with the fact that nobody wants coffee between 5:30 and 6. You may actually have a really fantastic market for your coffee all the way until 7:30. What you won't have is a market for your coffee in the half hour before you close, if you're radiating signs of closing. My wife gets very angry with me because, weirdly, although I'm a very placid guy, very occasionally I completely lose it, okay?
What makes you lose it?
And so I was outside, I won't name, I don't want the staff to get into trouble, but half an hour before a Starbucks closed at a major UK railway station, I had luggage because we just come back on the Eurostar. I obviously didn't want to take huge suitcases into Starbucks, so I sat down at a table outside the Starbucks where my luggage wouldn't get in the way of anybody else, and sent my wife and daughter in to get coffee. And while I was sitting there, 25 minutes before the restaurant closed, someone made me move because they were clearing the tables away. Right? I'm not going to say which station. I don't want anybody to get a bollocking, okay? But I absolutely lost it, because I think, that is an abominable thing to do. I was trying to do the good thing by not clogging up your coffee shop with my enormous wheelie Louis Vuitton steamer trunk.
I can't imagine you
No. Okay, fine. No, okay. I don't want to clog up your cafe. I'm sitting outside. You've put the tables and chairs outside. Clearing them away early and making a customer move is just bullshit. Those tables remain there until you close. Then you clear them away. Okay. You don't close them away 25 minutes early. Now, I don't know, and I'd like to know, is this because coffee shops pay inadequate overtime? Okay, and therefore everybody feels that effectively they're on the clock for the last half hour, and they've got to get as much cleaning done in the last half hour of the day as they possibly can. What I'm saying is that someone looking at the sales data from a coffee shop might get completely the wrong impression, because they think it's the time of day that's diminishing demand for coffee, whereas it's actually the behaviour of the restaurant itself as it nears closing time. And equally, opening early, right, means that if you open at 10 rather than 11, and only 5 people come in between 10 and 11, but the fact that there are 5 people sitting there at 11 means that 15 people come in at 11 rather than 7, it may pay you to open early, even though, looked at in isolation, the economics of that first hour may not make sense. And I would call that Dishumanomics, which is their astonishingly ingenious idea of solving the problem of Indian food at lunchtime by opening for breakfast.
It's genius. This is a really fucking random question, but what would be your death row meal, do you think?
Well, I've said that before, and I've been on another podcast where they actually cook your death row meal for you.
Oh, that's hilarious. What was it?
There's a Pakistani restaurant in, and it is Pakistani, in Mayfair, in Kinnerton Street, called Saloo. And they do something, it's not always in the menu, so ring and check, which is called Halim Akbari. Now, I have a bit of a caveat to Dishoom about this, because he says they've tried Halim in Dishoom and nobody likes it. And I keep arguing you have to persevere. It's a very strange thing where lamb is soaked overnight with grain to form a kind of meat porridge.
Fucking hell.
Okay, you then place it on top of rice, and then brilliantly, there are a lot of little side dishes so you can pimp your Halim, where there are bits of ginger, bits of chilli. I'm sorry, my wife's ringing in. Hi, can I call back a bit later? Is everything okay? Righty-ho. Okay, bye-bye. Sorry about this. I just got this new Samsung Freestyle projector, and I thought, okay, to complement this, I'll go and order one of those folding projector screens so I can put it up. And it's a bit like, Spinal Tap, where they get the dimensions all wrong. Buying anything rectangular online is absolutely fatal.
Right.
Because if you buy a TV, you have no idea really how big something is because you're just comparing identical black rectangles with the size of it. So I've ended up with this thing, this bloody projector screen. It looks like something David Brent would kind of use, and it's absolutely fucking enormous. And so my wife is basically desperately.
How big is it?
Well, I thought it was this modest little thing that you could put at the bottom of the bed. It turns out the thing's fucking.
Why do you want a projector so much? Was that the sort of the earlier?
Okay, it's like an air fryer. Okay, you don't know until you got one. Okay, there are a lot of things. Yeah, no, Benjamin, I've talked to the Samsung marketing director saying, why on earth don't you market this? No, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a TV. I'll come back to Halim Akbari in a moment. But rather than having a fourth TV, buying a projector. Now, the problem with projectors was there were very cheap ones which were kind of rubbish, and then there were kind of professional laser projectors which are $3,000 and require you to connect them to a sound bar, a massive sound system, God knows what. This Samsung projector is an all-in-one thing which basically gives you the full app interface. With Netflix, with Amazon Prime, with YouTube. Okay, you log in on the projector. It's got its own speaker.
Hey, pun.
Okay, so you can even run it in the garden at night. You can actually have films out in the garden.
Where would you plug it?
You could, I mean, if you've got a white wall, or like me, you could buy a ludicrously oversized projection screen. Of course, it's like Spinal Tap in reverse. You know the thing in Spinal Tap where they have the model of Stonehenge, which is sort of.
Spinal Tap.
Oh, it's a brilliant film. It's a parody of the kind of rock music scene. It's what the hell's name? Christopher. It's a fantastic. Comedy film. It's where the phrase "it goes up to 11" comes from. You may have heard that. All your listeners to your podcast should watch it because it's brilliant. Now, what happens is they want for their kind of massive rock stage, they want a huge model of Stonehenge, and they muddle up the sign for feet with the sign for inches. So they end up getting sent this model that's about 18 inches high. Okay, okay. Anyway, sorry. But
so you've got that going on at home
right now. The versatility is now. What's the great thing with the projector? With this glorious. I'm not paid to do this, but Benjamin's a friend of mine, and he's the marketing director of Samsung Europe. So the glorious Samsung Freestyle second-generation projector is, if you think about it, assuming you have some white walls in your house, which you probably do. Wallpaper's not really a thing, I imagine, in your home. I'm maybe wrong. It they may look like Carrie Johnson's house for all I know. But okay, the great thing about a projector is you've now got a completely portable TV. It's about twice the diameter of this thing, about as high, which can be as big or as small as you like, right? And you can plug it in anywhere there's a Wi-Fi connection on a plug, or indeed you can actually buy an optional additional charger, which Benjamin can send me now for free because okay,
that's your podcast plug.
That's my podcast plug. Now, what if you think about it, there's always that slight tension in the home between partners in that one of you wants a bigger TV than the other. The great thing with this projector TV is it takes up the space of a shoebox when you store it. Okay. However, if you want it to be a 100-inch TV, you pocket a long way from the wall, and if you're in the kitchen and you just want to make recipes, you've literally got a 30-inch TV or 20-inch TV just projecting against the wall. And then if you want to put it away, you've got no TV at all because it just goes into a cupboard. So you don't have a massive black rectangle on the wall all the time. Also, you can weirdly project it. Benjamin, by email, said it's a great thing. You can project it onto a table from the ceiling if you buy the ceiling mount. Or when you're in bed, you can project it on the ceiling and just lie back in bed and watch films above your head. Now, in the 1970s, people who wanted to improve their sex life used to put a mirror on the ceiling above their double bed. Now, they did that because they didn't have the technology to do something far more erotic, which is to have sex while watching a 2-hour YouTube documentary about steam traction engines, which I imagine is about. I haven't tried this, I hasten to add, but I imagine that's about as good as it gets.
You're revealing your fantasies here.
This is the slight problem with there is that weird thing, isn't there? Slightly aspergic men like me and YouTube.
Oh, YouTube's so good.
It is to be honest, I think it's the Great Library of Alexandria of the 21st century. I think it's the Great Pyramid of the 21st century. It's the greatest human achievement. Apart from, of course, the Samsung Galaxy second-generation projector, which is the perfect way in which to consume it.
There's a channel for you, actually,
Benjamin?
which they go into how films are made. I'll send you it.
Oh, it's sensational. Was a shit show, is it?
I don't.
There's a wonderful one called The Making of X was a shit show. Yeah.
It goes into, so they do Francis Ford co-piloted Godfather and Apocalypse Now. Because Apocalypse Now was a shit show. Like Charlie Sheen did so much coke and fags that he'd end up having a heart attack. They had everything that was going wrong with the...
and actually the helicopters kept being withdrawn because the government needed to fight some border skirmish.
Yeah.
So they couldn't rely on the supply of various...
It was filmed in the Philippines and they wanted it to be filmed in Australia. But anyway, it's a great... it really go into Francis Ford Coppola's like sort of creativity and how he uses the catastrophe to... Because the film started here and then it ended up being all this weird sort of dystopian film where they brought in... Marlon Brando was...
Oh, no. Those things where you zoom in...
Yeah.
Typically with a specialist commentator.
Yeah.
And you zoom in incredibly tight. So, okay, the most over-documented... sort of 24 hours of the 20th century, probably the Kennedy assassination. And there's a YouTube documentary called Ask a Mortician, which is hosted by someone who works in the funeral business. And the title of this particular episode is, Why Did JFK Not Have an Open Casket? And that sounds like a very, very niche question, but she goes in absolutely tight and then explodes it, effectively. And it turns into... Well, because it's entirely the take on the Kennedy assassination from a mortician, a funeral director's perspective. And the details are, a large part of it is that which coffin they bought, the fact that the Secret Service commandeered the hearse and were then incapable of operating the latch mechanism to actually slide the coffin out of the hearse to load it onto Air Force One, with the consequence that you had the dead body of JFK in a coffin in the back of a hearse with a load of guys with crowbars basically trying to lever it out of this car. The fact that it took the funeral home, God knows, ages to be paid for the casket. The fact that the casket they chose, they felt had to be the most expensive one, which meant it was ludicrously heavy. The fact that the whole of America was kind of in the wake of a Nancy Mitford book, I think, or Jessica Mitford book, called The American Way of Death, which was kind of expose of the US funeral industry, which therefore meant that everybody was highly suspicious of the whole funeral industry, da-di-da-di-da. But okay, it's impossible to encapsulate without her expertise and her brilliance, okay? But that business of actually doing the opposite of what television does, which is kind of to start broad, okay, of starting on something incredibly narrow and niche, and then effectively kind of zooming out, is utterly fascinating. I mean, life's kind of fractal, okay? You know, in other words, there's complexity at scale, but there's also the same kind of level of complexity when you, it's kind of Mandelbrot set, when you burrow into the details. And so YouTube, I mean, the thing about YouTube is, I think two things happened, which we didn't notice. Jimmy Carr always said that the weird thing that happened is YouTube became the biggest TV station in the world and nobody noticed. Yeah. I will also plug YouTube Premium, which is a very good use of $19.95 a month. I shouldn't be doing that because it's ad-free and I work in advertising, so I'm taking the bread out of my colleagues' mouths. But nonetheless, if you're a heavy YouTube user, okay, and you will be if you get YouTube Premium, it's worth it. Now, a few things. One, most of it's broadcast quality. I mean, I grew up in the era when we went on YouTube and it was wobbly, handheld, grainy pictures, for the most part. So first of all, the quality of filmmaking and just general cinematic grammar has improved immensely. Secondly, it has now become so extensive as a repository of film. I can't remember what the figure is, but you need to live for something like 7,000 years to watch all of it, and you'd still never catch up because more is being added all the time. That it's now become Wikipedia with video. Okay, now, it was browsable, but now it's searchable. So literally, if you have an obscure boiler and the flue freezes over, there's some weird guy who's made a film about how to unfreeze the flue on a Baxi boiler B7409. I mean, that probably is slightly overclaiming it. But in other words, the level of granularity you can go into is absolutely extraordinary. And if, like me, you're a tiny bit on the spectrum, of course, the ability, to be honest, my dad was exactly the same. You know, he stopped reading fiction and just read biographies, and I'm guilty of the same failing, actually. But, you know, I love factual television of any kind.
Yes, yeah.
Extraordinary. And so that I think is really, really interesting. Because
what's some of the most interesting biographies you've read?
Well, I must get back to Halim Akbari, by the way.
Yeah.
So you can pimp your Halim.
Yeah.
Because they're little bowls. Typically, I think, is it ground ginger? It's probably chili. Anyway, they're lots of little powders, and you can mix them. You can either mix them into the Halim or sprinkle them unevenly on the top to get a kind of... I think one of the reasons why bubble tea, the behavioural economics of bubble tea, is its variable reinforcement theory in a cup.
Wait,
which is
that's a fucking mouthful.
We quite like things, okay, where it's a bit like the chocolate at the bottom of the cornetto, which actually I think is there to prevent leakage, but it's like the final little unexpected treat it's the Easter egg at the end. Okay. And we seem to like certain foods that are kind of slightly uneven. Okay, so I'll go back to the
uneven in terms of texture.
So there was an experiment with pigeons where they basically trained pigeons, so if they pecked a switch, they got a couple of pellets of food.
Yeah.
And the pigeons would basically peck the switch, have a couple of pellets of food, peck it again, have another couple of pellets of food, and after about 3 pecks, they get a bit sated and a bit bored, and they wander off to do some other pigeon stuff, whatever they do.
Other pigeon stuff.
Shitting on people, whatever it is, okay? And then there was a weird glitch in the experiment where they kind of ran out of food pellets. And so they made the thing a bit random, where when the pigeons pecked the thing, they couldn't afford to give them 2 pellets every time. Sometimes the pigeons would get no pellets, sometimes they get 1, sometimes they get 2. And at that point, the pellets was like a bloody pigeon fruit machine. They became completely addicted to this because the return was no longer constant and predictable, it was uncertain.
The pigeons got addicted.
The pigeons basically just pecked and pecked and pecked and pecked, and you basically created pigeon Vegas for these bloody things. Yeah. And they were just going and pecking away. And there seems to be some component in variable reinforcement theory which may explain the appeal of bubble tea, which is that it's different. It keeps changing all the way down. Sometimes you get one of these big lumps of tapioca shooting up.
The texture of it.
Well, it's just that no two sips are completely alike.
I interviewed Margot Henderson, who's Fergus Henderson's wife, who obviously did St. John. And we were talking...
That, would you believe it, was my local. We were actually in St. John Street as an agency.
Oh, really?
Back in the mid-90s. And my God, I was grateful to that place.
So a couple of things. So she talked about the art of drinking a Negroni and why Negroni's so good. So it's like you're quite stressed. The first sip of Negroni is actually super strong and punches you, and you get the thing of the lemon, or sorry, the orange or the lemon. So that really hits you. And then you have 2 of those. And actually, as you get slightly more drunk from the big hits, by the time you get to the end of the Negroni, the ice cubes begin to melt, so it's actually a much softer drink. So what we were saying is it sort of dances with your mood.
Well, I mean, when I drink a gin and tonic, I like to have the tonic bottle so I can vary the strength as I go through.
Yeah.
I like to start with something. Basically, you start with something which is, a bit of a depth charge, and then you end up with something that's a soft drink.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that may explain why, actually, if you make a really good Bloody Mary, you shouldn't mix it perfectly. Conceivably. In other words, the Tabasco should be slightly unevenly distributed. I don't know. What do you think? Okay. Now, this is a bit weird, because one of the things I say, one of the things I say, which is that the opposite of a good idea can be another good idea.
Yeah.
Right? The interesting thing with food is there's McDonald's food where the success is that it's completely predictable. There are no surprises. In other words, there's nothing there to make you uneasy, okay? And then there's another kind of food which is, it's never the same twice. And weirdly, depending on whatever mental frame of perception it may be, sometimes we seem to want one, and sometimes we seem to want the other. And you might argue there's a theory about the brain that most of what we perceive is actually a prediction, and we only really turn our senses up into gear when something surprises us. So this is a really interesting philosophical question. Don't ask me, ask a guy called, say, Charles Spence at Oxford, who does a huge amount of research into this. So he will do wonderful, wonderful experiments. Anybody in the food industry, get this guy in and pay him a lot of money, because he's fantastic.
What does he do? Sorry,
he will make a strawberry-flavoured sorbet, make it yellow, and put it inside a frozen lemon. So your brain is entirely expecting the thing to be citric and bitter, and instead it's sweet. And the interplay between expectation and delivery basically creates a new taste that doesn't really exist in the natural world. It creates essentially a brain stimulus around taste. The contrast between what you're expecting and what you get generates something on what you might call a third dimension of taste.
Have you heard about Steven Pinker's strawberry cheesecake principle?
Hit me. I know.
So when I got fucking obsessed with why illustration works so well with food. Sometimes, obviously, all these products around us is illustration.
Yep.
And in lots of these sort of hipster pizza restaurants now, on their box they'll use illustration. And everywhere I looked, Noble Rot, the wine bar, uses illustration.
A bit of that may simply be it's that you're effectively tapping into heuristic assumptions that have been established by other artisan brands which use illustration. So illustration and hand drawing kind of says handmade a little bit. I mean, Charlie Bigham's genius, I think, was putting the thing in a bamboo thing rather than a plastic pot. Okay, fundamentally, that completely changed our perception of what that food might be and what it might deliver. Okay, and it made us feel that it was kind of handmade because the container didn't say factory.
Yeah.
Right? And indeed, the packaging didn't say it's designed on an Apple Mac. It suggests it was designed by hand. But what often happens then is that this then creates a consumer assumption that food that's packaged like that is that kind of food. And people who therefore, an example would be, you're having guests round, okay? You'd probably rather serve them hand-illustrated crisps, okay? Or crisps that have a kind of artisanal quality, rather than crisps that look like they're produced by a multinational.
Yeah.
And so it kind of says, now, obviously, multinationals are now tapping into this because they're not completely blind. And, you have Tesco.
And Sensations are an anomaly to that. Because Sensations with...
They were posh crisps from Walker's, yeah.
And then I suppose crisps got posher and posher and posher.
Very funny. I had a friend who was involved in the naming of Sensations. And two things happened. There was a huge debate about what the behavioural insights team called itself within government. And somebody, might have been David Halpin, said, actually, this debate is completely irrelevant because whatever we call ourselves, people are going to call us the nudge unit. And indeed they did.
The nudge unit?
Nudge unit, because it was inspired by Thaler's book, Nudge, effectively.
Yeah.
And so everybody's going to call it the nudge unit for short.
Yeah.
The same thing happened with Walker's Sensations, where apparently a friend of mine was involved in the discussions around the naming, and someone said, actually, what we call this is kind of irrelevant because everybody's going to call them posh crisps, which is kind of what they did.
Yes. Yeah, and I suppose the crisps get posher and posher and posher. Then it went Tyrrell's, obviously, which Perry did Tyrrell's.
I mean, this is an extraordinary testament to the brand value and thus economic value created by packaging design.
Oh, it's crazy. The way Perry's...
Okay, you've got Sip Smith over there, you've got Yo Valley, I don't think he designed San Pellegrino. I'm not going to give him credit for that, because I think that's been around since before he was born. I think that's just sitting there as a bottle, isn't it?
But in terms of the...
around it, it's really, really interesting. Dorset cereals, you go around to... Is it pronounced Beaver or Belvoir?
It's Belvoir, I think it is. I always call it Belvoir.
Okay, now, are Callow actually Scandinavian?
I don't know.
Very mischievous question, because they may not be.
The best story is Goo, right, in terms of the selling of ideas. So Goo.
It's British. It's East End company, right?
Yeah, British.
But bang an umlaut on it, or diaresis thing.
But so what Perry did to sell the idea to James, who's the founder, is he goes, right, leave it with me. I'm going to go and just do a load of research. They had the Goo pudding, and he put the slide up on probably that TV there, and was like, oh my God, James, I found a company in Norway or wherever it is, or Sweden, that's got this thing called Goo, and it's look how great that looks. So if only we could do this. And then James was like, fuck, I wish we'd have done that. And then Perry goes, we have. That's your brand.
That's your brand.
And that's the genius of selling ideas. Whereas if he said, so it's such a good way to sell an idea. Do you know what I mean?
Technically, that's known as lying. But nonetheless, as long as you reveal the lie afterwards.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
As long as you reveal afterwards, you see, the second you thought this was a company, you wanted to buy it. And yet, which is an emotional response. And yet, if you'd come along and said, I've got this idea about Goo, the first reaction would be, can you show me 4 more alternatives, please?
Exactly. Well, so Perry's...
Now, we're creating a business environment where it's impossible, except for entrepreneurs and arguably slightly deranged CEOs, to use an incredibly valuable human skill, which we've evolved over millions of years, which is called intuition. And our fear of intuition, in other words, the requirement that all intuition be replaced by data, is basically killing business. It's why, broadly speaking, which is tragic, okay? Everybody who wants to do something interesting and new leaves a large company in order to do it.
Yeah, I want to talk about the data and intuition as like sort of a barbell, a la sort of Nassim Taleb. And this question, I've had this written down since we did our first podcast. I've just never got around to asking it because we ended up talking about fucking chicken korma for 2 hours.
I'll give another plug for Salu's Halim Akbari.
Yeah, we can go.
And by the way, while I'm doing this, I'm starting this tradition, right, where the podcast guest gets to advertise, not in return for payment, but just to recommend things they really like. Because I think we deserve our place in the sun, right? So
what else would you
if
recommend?
you're hungry and in Sevenoaks,
Yeah.
and you want a good arepa,
Arepa?
go to Sevenoaks' best Venezuelan cafe, which is called Budari, which is also Sevenoaks' only Venezuelan cafe, unsurprisingly. But it's hard to find, it's in the shambles, you won't regret it. Also available on Deliveroo. So this is
From the
the
Venezuelan
arepa,
cafe?
for those of you who are gluten-free, arepa is made from cornbread. Budari is the name of the hot griddle plate on which it's made.
Yeah.
Okay. So gluten intolerant or gluten-free people can enjoy an arepa sandwich with complete freedom. And it's just a glorious, tiny little cafe tucked around the back of nowhere, the kind of place which absolutely deserves to flourish. And if you're in Westerham, nearby Westerham, why not go to Bussey's Bites, which is possibly Britain's only Jamaican-Italian cafe. Ooh. Now, the way the...
What's their equivalent of the...
He's Italian,
Yeah.
she's Jamaican.
What's their sort of middle ground for you? Like, what's their version of the
Well,
schnitzel
It's
burger?
absolutely brilliant, because if you're going out with people who are a bit wussy about spice,
Yeah.
they can have something entirely Italian. Whereas the Jamaican stuff, ramps up the
rips
stimulus
your head
a
off
bit.
sort of thing,
They also
yeah.
make very, very good coffee, and they also sell vegetables. So it's a wonderful little place, and it's just adorable. And my argument is, I work in advertising, so I'm normally paid to advertise things, and it's quite nice in my spare time to advertise things that deserve to be advertised, that deserve to be better known.
They could almost be like a little mug. What I want to ask you is 10 times 1 is not the same as 1 times 10?
No.
So because that's, again, it's been a question on my mind, but maybe let's use that as a...
Mathematically, it is.
Yeah, mathematically it's not, but then... So,
One person coming to you 10 times is not the same as 10 people coming to you once.
Yeah.
Okay. The only real measure, I would argue, now there are obviously kind of weird exceptions to this in the case of those kind of Michelin 3-star restaurants which everybody only goes to once. And I always ask that as an interesting reflection of signalling value versus intrinsic value in food. Which is if you often ask people what's the best meal they've ever had in their life, okay, they'll usually cite a really fancy restaurant. And then you ask them the second question, and how often have you eaten there? And almost inevitably the answer is once. And I always ask the question, well, if it was that good, why didn't you go back? And I always suspect that the signalling value of having been there is a large part of the experience. Okay, so there's no point in going back because the value you get from saying you've been there is actually greater than the value you got from eating there. Consequently, there are also restaurants which people like, indeed, Budari in Sevenoaks. Sevenoaks is best Venezuelan cafe, which people go back to repeatedly. Okay, and I always think that the real measure of a fantastic place has to be repeat purchase. In other words, the true measure of what you might call revealed preference is not the thing that people do once, which may be for bragging rights. It's the thing that people do a hell of a lot.
But in terms of the 1 times 10 is not the same as 10 times 1, what are the implications for that? Not necessarily with
One
restaurants,
reason to have a loyalty program is you can tell the difference between the two. Because there are businesses which look successful in the early phases because everybody gives them a try and leaves disappointed and never comes back. Now, it's possible to operate as a business just on naive customers for a certain length of time, or in the case of New York, just on the case of novelty. But that's not really a sustainable business.
What do you think's better, New York or London for food, and what's the differences you've noticed? I swear it's more status seeking in New York.
London's obviously better for food because we have better Indian restaurants. Everything else is secondary.
But I swear in New York it's like the status.
All Indian restaurants, in my book, have a Michelin star. Okay, because I love Indian food so much.
Why St. John are clever? St. John are clever. I listened to a podcast. That podcast, I'll send you a link about the mechanics of a Michelin star restaurant and how much money they actually make. And he goes,
there's someone actually making a documentary about this
that'd
right
be
now.
amazing. Yeah, but what he says is if you lose a star, that the loss of a star is so fucking detrimental to your business, then actually gaining one it is.
There are people who actually want to opt out
Yeah.
of the whole system and actually decline to.
Well, that's St. John basically hide the fact that they've got a Michelin star, the one in Smithfield Market. And I think that's fucking clever because they're building a business. They've got a Michelin star. But
So you can go to the Michelin Guide and find St. John, but they never.
They don't say.
No,
and there's a restaurant-
let's shut up about this. 'Cause I don't want to ruin it for them because I'm
Yeah.
very fond of that place.
Yeah.
And but that is ingenious
so clever to
because
almost
also
hide
you're a
that.
hostage to fortune. You see.
Yeah, and also there's a restaurant.
Absolutely right.
There was a restaurant in where was Shakespeare
Sounds
born?
on what?
Wherever that was.
Stratford-on-Avon.
Yes, yeah. Where they lost the star and it just completely decimated their business. Because you basically lose the star, lose the status.
Also
suddenly-
forces you. Because what makes a Michelin-starred restaurant may be at odds with what consumers want, particularly as eating out becomes less of a special occasion thing, right? And it forces you to serve the kind of food in the kind of environment which actually... Okay, I mean, I had a friend who, I can't remember what it was, but he was in Los Angeles and basically doing a whole lot of business and forced to eat at fancy restaurants for sort of 5 nights in a row. And he said he was craving beans on toast by the end of it. You know, those kind of meals aren't the kind of meals you want to have all that often. I have met really rich people who basically seem to eat in Michelin-starred restaurants all the time. And I find that deeply weird because it's not a kind of food that you want routinely, nor is it the kind of environment that you want to eat in routinely either. It may be that they do that because when you do that, you bump into other very rich people and it's quite valuable. And that was to some extent the value of the Concorde, which is it was an economy class flight. Bloody hell. It was an economy class flight. You were basically seated like EasyJet, but on a plane full of really rich, influential people. So in business class or in first class, it would be absolute social anathema to break into conversation with your next door neighbour. But on the Concorde, it was actually discourteous not to do so because you were rubbing shoulders with them. And so part of the value of the Concorde was as a kind of a networking device at 55,000 feet. So there may be an element that people go to those restaurants because they bump into their other super rich friends and then end up doing deals. But it doesn't strike me as a way that a normal person would want to eat, because you need to give specialness a degree of rarity and scarcity. And that raises questions like, my daughter is always convinced that Five Guys is overexpanded. She thinks that it's okay to have a few Five Guys in London, it's probably okay to have one in Birmingham, Glasgow, Newcastle. But once you've got a Five Guys in Tunbridge Wells, it's lost a bit of its, ooh, shit, there's a Five Guys, I better go while I've got the chance, and therefore become... Now, I don't know if she's right or not, but it's an interesting observation.
Well, in and out.
And of course, private equity often forces these brands to overexpand, and consequently they lose some of what made them special to begin with.
Well, that's why I love In and Out, the fact they just constrict it.
They won't expand beyond...
Between
in Arizona,
California.
I think it's because they've got their own beef herd, if I'm right, and they won't open anywhere where the beef can't be served fresh. And consequently, I think they made their way into... I think you can get one in San Antonio, Western Texas, New Mexico, I think, but they won't go to the East Coast.
Yeah.
Something similar, actually, with White Tower, which is a very, very...
White Tower?
Okay, it's basically before there was...
White, as in...
White Tower, before there was McDonald's... Sorry, I'm talking bollocks. White Castle.
Oh, is that Harry and Kumar get the money?
Yeah, Harry.
Yeah.
I don't know why I call it White Tower. I'm getting to see now. White Castle. Before there was McDonald's, before there was Burger King, there was White Castle. And it's an extraordinary, interesting story. The reason it hasn't expanded that much is because it's family-owned, and they don't want to franchise. They have franchise, but they don't want to do it. And they also confine themselves to a pretty strict geographical area, although apparently the sliders are actually buyable in shops. What they did, we assume that the burger is kind of like this innate American food item. However, if you read the history of White Castle, at the time they started, one of the reasons Americans are probably fixated with steak is that minced beef or minced meat of any kind had been majorly discredited by a book in about 1916-17, I think, by Sinclair Lewis, if I've got that right, which was inside basically an expose of the Chicago meat and meatpacking industry, where he revealed that basically whenever you had minced beef, loads of other things, it was a bit like the horse meat scandal, loads of other things were always being mixed in. And so minced beef was kind of discredited, which may explain partly the American obsession with steak. Because they had a much more centralised meat industry than the British did. You know, your butcher would probably mince the beef locally, right? Whereas in America, the whole thing was based around this kind of massive, like cheese and beer, you know, Wisconsin or whatever, you know, very, very centralised. And White Castle basically did something very clever. They made the restaurants incredibly clean. The staff were dressed in these kind of paper disposable clothes. And I'm pretty sure that the beef was ground on the premises within the presence of the customer. And so they effectively resurrected the burger. It was their marketing prowess which took a despised meat form and made it acceptable.
That's crazy.
So in a sense, they're the kind of, how do you describe it? They're the kind of John the Baptist and McDonald's. Jesus, my wife's going to kill me. Okay, this was an extraordinary piece of psychological innovation which realises that there's something that everybody likes to eat, but they don't trust it. So the first problem we've got to solve is not actually a logistical problem or a supply problem. The first problem we've got to solve is a psychological problem, which is mistrust of ground beef.
There's a restaurant in called...
What time does the online gig start? 12, okay. So no, I've got another 6 minutes. Yeah, I do want to go to the loo, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah, we'll begin...
I don't need a poo or anything. Ruin the whole thing.
We'll just try, if you only got a couple of minutes, do some quick questions then. So had Seth Godin on again the other day, which was fascinating. I asked him a question, which is, what was a rule of marketing which was around 400 years ago that will still be around in 400 years? I'd love to know what those are for you.
Be famous. And it's so banal that we forget to say it. Advertising agencies feel stupid saying, we're going to make you famous, because it sounds like so sort of banal. Instead we say, you know, we're going to reposition your brand as a da-di-da-di-da, okay? Right? But fame compounds. And fame also takes you through various interesting thresholds of growth where you don't have to find your customers find you. When you call someone, they return your calls. People come to you offering to work for you rather than you having to find employees. That fundamentally people work for you for longer because your name on their CV may have some value to them, etc. That fame, it is completely wrong to look at advertising investment and fame on the basis of a crude ROI. Because fame is not fame and therefore marketing expenditure is not an input with a single result. It's a lubricant, it's a catalyst, okay? The best definition I ever remember of this is a guy called Johnson, I'm just trying to remember what his first name is, who wrote a book called Brands That Mean Business, and he said, having a great brand is like playing the game of capitalism on easy mode. Everything you do, it isn't just selling. Everything you do is just a bit easier, a bit more forgiving, requires a bit less work than if you're playing the game on hard mode, which is when you don't have a brand.
And that's almost links back to that.
So we spent some money on advertising, and the effect on immediate sales was X.
That
is a complete underestimation of the value of fame-building activity.
That links back to that sort of ecosystem of the restaurants we were talking about earlier, of having your halo effect of your Michelin star restaurant and your pub, the fame
right.
from the halo
so
restaurant.
What you're doing is you're recirculating fame, okay? And absolutely right. And actually, some things you may make a small amount of money from, but they may be producing a lot of fame.
Yes.
Okay. So yes, if you go and do talks, it's very well paid, okay? But writing a book and talking about it on a podcast is actually enabling you to make that money from giving the talks by making you more famous.
Right. Final question.
And businesses are so obsessed with divide and rule.
What do you mean by that?
Well, taking every component of a business and demanding that it maximises its own internal profit without consideration for the contribution that might be making to the rest of the system. that often. I mean, I've managed to solve. I managed to win this argument, but Ogilvy, would be raising for Ogilvy to say, "Why are you going on a podcast? They're not paying you." Okay, and so consequently, I don't think any business has a proper calculus of the value of this stuff. I think that every single way in which they calculate it, designed by kind of reductionists in the finance department, serves to underestimate the value of marketing.
One final thing. So book Ape That Understood the Universe, great book. The opening chapter's the alien coming down.
Yep.
And it's like, what the fuck is humanity, right? Asked this to Seth, like, how would you explain the role of marketing on human nature to an alien?
It goes way back beyond when they were humans.
Okay.
It's the necessity in any environment or ecosystem where choices can be made, particularly that means one with movement. Okay, it is the necessity to communicate. That in advance of in other words, a bee can travel to a large flower with big petals in the confident expectation that the journey will not be wasted because a flower that didn't have much nectar or pollen. Now, there are orchids which fake this, okay? There's fake advertising in nature, okay? Scam advertising. The orchid looks like something that's attractive to the bee, but it doesn't deliver any nectar or pollen or anything of any value. So that's basically scam advertising. Orchids are scam advertising, in the plant world. Okay. However, the confident expectation is that unless it had enough nectar, pollen, or whatever it is, sufficient to attract repeat visits from insects, it would not be worth the while of this plant investing in petals to advertise its presence. And in the same way, if you're doing car advertising, it would be, if this company spends $5 million advertising this car, they would not do that if, on test driving the car, I discovered it was shit. So, at the very least, I can confidently believe it may be worth test driving this car, given that the investment in upfront communication, costly signalling, okay, is a reliable indicator of a seller's confidence in the popularity of their product, in some way. Now, if you want another example of costly signalling, by the way, that every single sodding podcast, we have the technology to have lapel mics, invisible microphones, right? Okay. Every single podcast has people sitting in front of expensive microphones, which is a way of saying, "I'm so serious about this shit. I've actually spewed, a few grand on recording equipment." This is totally pointless.
There's no
absolutely no. Oh, sorry, I might be causing offence, but an awful lot of this stuff, okay, it's just, ooh, these must be serious podcasters because they've got a big microphone.
Well, I remember when I interviewed James Smith, who's Chris Williamson's business partner the other day, and it was the first time we'd used all this kit in Brewdog. And straight away, it's almost like you're better to have it than to not. But it's like, as last time we recorded an iPhone, right? And I think it works fine.
Yeah, fine.
But when he came in the room, the first thing he said was like, "Yeah, you're proper podcasters because the SD card's in there." And that's like a little status signaling thing. A Shure mic is status signaling.
Yes.
It's so interesting. Right, you've got.
I've got to go. But this has been absolutely fantastic. What a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I've got to go upstairs.
I remember someone in the industry went, how do I know who's the manager? And I went, is it ticking over? Who's checking? Who's talking to guests? Who's touching tables? Who's looking at ticket times? And they were like, that girl there. I went, that's the manager. And what they're actually doing is not managing. I've got a uniform, I've got a position of power, so I can lord it over you. And I walk around a clipboard, and I'm not really bothered about my team. I'm not really about the guests. Early doors, you've got to be a super team player. Even if you're leading, you've got to be on the pitch.
Graham, thank you for doing this, mate. Yeah, super excited. As I said to you when we were, when I came in here, one, I massively huge respect for this brand, Odenstein, but also I liked your career running up to today. So, you know, sort of Wagamama, Chippies, which we can talk about because I love a good fucking fish and chips. Caravan, Laura and Chris have been on this poddy. Jess is a really good mate of mine, and then obviously, you know, Nick Jones at Soho House. So I think it's a real nice mix of different cultures, you know, Kiwi, Danish, British, potentially Japanese, which I love, and so there's that part, but then I'm also really excited to explore the operator part. As I said to you, I've had so many founders on this podcast, but there's definitely a tension between founder and operator. That can either be a wonderful jazz-like dance, or it can be a sort of, you know, malevolent kind of just head-bashing arguments all the time. So thanks, mate. I'm excited.
Absolute pleasure.
Let's start with Chippies and looking through it through an operational lens and eye, because I think this will give us sort of fertile territory to how we sort of get onto the other parts. So talk me through, like, what are some of the operational headaches of running successful fish and chips restaurants?
You're dealing with two natural products. So unlike burger, pizza, or whatever, you're dealing with fish that won't go, yeah, I'll be exactly this every single time. So you can buy weight, you can buy size to a certain degree, but you can't flex that in your prices unless you know, uber cool and doing it all by weight. And the same with potatoes. You know, doing the business for, I think I probably did it nearly 6 years. 1 year was, you know, absolute shite harvest, and you know, luckily we had such a good relationship with our potato merchant that we were getting it. But our yield from a 40-kilo bag would be half of what you used to do. You can't suddenly go, hey customers, I'm doubling the price of chips, because they'll tell you where to go. So you've got that fluctuation, and I think the reason that I was, you know, kind of lucky is really good relationships with our suppliers that would fix the price for the year. So we could go, okay, we haven't got that fluctuation, we know what we're dealing with, and then really getting close to them. So I went all the way to Norway, Osland, went on the vessel, didn't go out to sea because they're out for ages, but went on the vessel, met the captain, so I could come back, tell the team, tell the customers, oh yeah, this is you know, this is us. Used to go out with the farmer, David. He used to take me up around the fens. We go to the pub at lunchtime. Sometimes we'd leave, sometimes we didn't. But you know,
Where was this? Sorry, this was in.
This was Deep Blue, and then when I had my business, Catch.
Yeah. So sorry, no. Where were you going to the pub? Like, what was
Cambridge. So we were up kind of up past the fence, so kind of almost borderline of Leicestershire, Lincolnshire, Cambridge.
Yes. Cool.
And you know, he walked the fields pretty much every day, and he could tell me exactly what was happening. You know, would get the royal tour, and he'd be like, "They're your potatoes. These are the potatoes for, you know, the kind of the Chinese chippies, and these are pig food, and those are." And he was like, "Oh, I can't say." I'm like, "What?" He said, "No, I can't say. I can't say."
Where was it? Where was it?
It was for a well-known crisp company that aren't real crisps.
Based in Leicester.
The you know, you flip it until you can't stop thing in the tube.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, "That?" He said, "Yeah, there's no. What you think? There's real, like, loads of potato in that product." Wow. Scary but true. So really, really lucky in terms of all of the other challenges. And I think that there's lots of mum and pop operations. So, you know, it's kind of in the family. So you're not as hard on yourself as you probably should be.
Just for context, so Deep Blue for listeners, that was how many sites was that? It was a chain.
Yeah. I joined when we had two. I left when we were in the mid-30s.
Yeah.
And you know, we would literally go to a town, find the rundown fish and chip shop where, you know, people were in their 60s going, we've had enough.
Yeah.
Buy the shop, rebrand it, redo it, quality products, quality people, quality service, and suddenly, you know, you bought a shop that was doing £2,000 a week and you're doing 20.
Yeah.
So that was the model.
How would you? Because I think Chippies are so. It's because, as I was saying to you, my mate's got his massive property business done really well. He was thinking about going into opening a chippy because he's like, mate, the fucking margins are absurd if you can get it right.
Yeah.
What are you doing differently? Because this applies to any business. You go in and say, right, how I get like improving the decor, improving like how do you get something from 2k a week or a month, whatever it is, a week to 20k? That's 10xing something.
Yeah.
What was the deep?
You're looking at that mix of who uses you. So
when you, as in like the shopper,
yeah,
the consumer.
So the consumer, and you're looking. So if the town had a Waitrose, we're going to go right, tick.
Yes.
We know that, and you know, is that do you go with the demographic, or do you do, you know, the kind of psychographic that you're all kind of into? And we kind of did that piece of work, and it just was, we got a couple of, you know, brands that we could go, they've done their homework, and then did that. Usually you'd put hard-working people in there and give them a really nice little slice of pie, and that made all the difference. You've got a character behind the range frying that can see you. Dan, I've got a massive one, and we'll just, that little bit of theatre, it just makes such a difference from the usual, what are you having, mate? Be about 10 minutes. And I lived in, at the time, I lived in Banstead in Surrey.
Oh, mate, that's this is where my mate lives.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I know that very well,
So our local chip shop.
Have you been to the Raj, the curry house? Just out of interest. Fucking banging, isn't it?
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
He always manages to sell you a little file sauce on the side. You know what you're having.
It's the best curry, it's the most underrated curry in the world.
Super good.
Yeah, sorry.
My local chippy, super expensive, super affluent area, and every Friday I'd go there and be like, it's 2 products, you need to get at the same time. And you'd queue for 20 minutes and it'd be like, oh, just waiting for the chips, mate. How difficult can this be? And, the guy had one shop, absolutely minted, got to that success syndrome of, I don't need to keep trying harder, I've got these people. I just thought, this is just something, if you could execute it really well. The packaging, we spent a lot of time and working out.
This was Deep Blue.
Yeah, this is Deep Blue.
Yeah.
I did catch after I left.
We'll get onto that, yeah.
But yeah, packaging and just raising everything, and also just doing fish and chips. So you should do burgers, you should do pizza, you should do kebabs, and I get the single operator gets kind of blindfolded and just sees.
Why do you think people do that? Because that's one thing. So on a friend of the show, Rory Sutherland, he says just do one thing well.
Correct.
Yeah, just do one thing
1000%.
well. But then I go to Isha. Yeah. Have you been to Bear and Isha?
Yeah.
Local booze, I love it.
Yeah.
They've got, it's called Isha Best K over the road.
Yeah.
When I'm drunk, I'm in there, and they do the most phenomenal kebab known to man.
Yeah.
But they've also got a plethora of other things on the menu, and I'm like, I just don't. From their perspective, I don't understand why they're doing that, because it's like, surely it's just like, just economies of scale, just get the kebab right, get the fish and chips right, get the pizza right.
Yeah.
But why do you think from their perspective they add on this whole
Because
litany?
they'll be told, it'd be really good if you did this.
Yeah.
And then at some point, a salesman will come in and go, oh, if you did this, look at that. And what they don't realise is that their sales of fish and chips, say with 10 grand a week, and then they suddenly add kebabs.
Yes.
And they go, I'm doing 12 grand a week. But what happens over a little period of time is that 2 just creeps in, and then they'll sink back down to the 10, but they've lost a big chunk, 20% of their core. And then they go, remember when I did kebabs? We got a big lift. I'm going to do burgers. And then they get another big lift. And because they're taking...
It's a cycle of trying to
Totally. And they're taking their eye off what is the absolute one thing, the key thing you've got to get right. Because the difference between a great bit of fish and a bad bit of fish is 30 seconds, literally, in the range. Yeah. It's 30 seconds. And then suddenly you've got a pizza oven. And you've doubled your overheads of electricity. You're going, I need more staff. I've got to get different packages in. You're getting a harder time from the EHO because you have all these different chopping boards. And you just get in the weeds. Instead of going 2 supplies, 1 for chips, 1 for fish, I've now got the kebab guy. The kebab guy comes on a Tuesday morning. I've got to get up early for him. And you just lose total focus. You just kind of, this goes on this pursuit of trivial pursuits. I've got to get one of every pie. No, just stick with your one pie and smash it. And that's what I did with catch. I added things like salmon.
Catch was, talk me through catch.
Catch, and I just took fish and chips and elevated it to another level.
And you had your own physical stores?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
Yeah, Kent. I looked, because of Deep Blue, and...
Is Deep Blue the one in Cobham?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not anymore, is it?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So that's my chip. I know this chippy well. Yeah.
So they bought Harry Ramsden, so they've got that. They've gone international, doing a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
But I thought there was an opportunity to just elevate it even more.
Yes.
People didn't always want chips, so there was other options.
What were the other options?
Just salads, different ways of doing potatoes, elevated the packaging even more, got different types of fish, so like not rock salmon but proper fillets of salmon, would grill stuff, so not everything was just through the range, so I had grills so you could come in and go, just want a Dover sole, dude, just want a Dover sole. I've got everything at home sorted, I'm going to walk in, put it on, me and the missus, bottle of wine, Dover sole. Yeah. So I did that, which was good fun. Working on your own is not good fun.
Where were you? Sorry, they were down in Kent?
Yeah, so I was travelling to Kent every day.
From Banstead?
From Banstead, which was great fun. And sitting on the motorway, and then obviously you had the problems with the Channel Tunnel. There's a backup, and 2.5 years was just like, nah.
And because I think you learn a lot from people's mistakes, and I don't mean
huge.
What were some of those biggest mistakes you made with catch? Because I think every category can be premiumised. Mm-hmm. There's a brilliant business called Willie's Pies.
Yep.
Who again, pie and mash shops have kind of dwindled, you could say.
Yeah.
Then there was a massive room for someone to come and premiumise pies, elevate pies. He worked at St. John, he worked at Brat.
Oh, wow.
So he's got the chef background. They go to H.G. Walters to get their ingredients. 3 pies, fucking does it well, into Ocado. And I think one of the categories which is right for innovation is fish and chips. You've got Popeye. Is it Poppies, which is the old school one in East London, I think.
Yeah.
And then...
Yeah, they've got a couple. They've got one in Soho as well, I think.
Yeah, and they've got one in... Where were we the other day?
Shoreditch, just by Truman Brewery.
Yeah. I think it was when we were recording that podcast last week. Yeah, anyway, around that. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Truman Brewery. So they're sort of the best in class. But then, so I think fish and chips, there's room there. But I'd love to know what went wrong with the 1 to 3 things.
Location. It was just, wearing down, and you kind of do a 12-hour day, and you're like, I've got to drive home, I've got to be up at 6, got to drive back. And you kind of get into that moany cul-de-sac of, I think also just always being in big companies of going, right, I need to do some marketing. That'll be me. Oh, I need to do like the accounts and, you know, do all the NI payments, etc. That'll be me. Oh, I need to do a risk assessment because one of the girls is pregnant. So who's going to do that? Oh, that'll be me. And you suddenly just got to become everything, you know, like an octopus. And I think that bit of admin, hate admin, really detest it. You know, left school, worked in offices, worked in the city. I'm just like, no way. I need to meet different people every day. I need to have something, you know, different landscape every day. So they were the two real big things. Opened a second site in Canterbury, and just didn't do my homework. Was probably a little bit.
What didn't you do about it?
A little bit arrogant. I just made this assumption that Canterbury was super posh, and I went there when tourists were there. I'm like, man, Ace Footfall, this is brilliant. And it took a really long while to do the deal, and it just didn't. I mean, it was good, but it was just nowhere near as good as I wanted it to be. And you know, literally after the first month, you know when you open a business, that kind of 12 to 18 week period, that's where you're going to be. That is where you're going to open, and that's where, you know, your turn will be. And we were probably about 5k a week off where I wanted that to be. And then suddenly to lift that, you know, for every grand that you're off, you got to spend 10 grand in marketing minimum. And yeah, just didn't pick the right site. So, you know, I know when you roll stuff out, you get 1 in 15 wrong. That's not quite right. But for your second one, I guess I probably fell a little out of love of it. Had some people that wanted to invest, and then kind of looked at some other sites that were better. And then did the maths and thought, I'm going to work my nuts off for the next 5 years and just kind of still be earning this level, working for 5 times harder. And yeah, just started chatting to my silent partner and was like, yeah, no problem, we're good, I'll take it.
Yeah. I think there's knowing when to quit is a hard, because it's like it's one of those things that I say this a lot on the podcast. It's one of don't quit is both right and wrong.
Yeah.
So it's like, don't quit if you're doing something that could actually work. Like, keep fucking going, right? But like, I'm about 5'2", mate. If I'm saying I want to be an NBA player, be a basketball player, I probably should quit that. Just because, like, if you look at the actual the likelihood of it being a success. Yeah. But I think the whole idea of like never quit, man, all this hustle entrepreneurship, like just keep going. It's like, well, actually, if it's not working, have the kind of put the ego aside and say, right, it's time to quit and just move on.
And it's funny in other situations, other jobs. You know, our chairman's just like, you are so resilient. I can't believe how resilient you are. And at that time, I think it was just that passion and that love had just started to creep away. So that normal bit of, you know, being super resilient and, you know, whatever chip you've got on your shoulder, pardon the pun, you know, that just keeps you going. I just kind of lost that. And yeah, just fell out of love.
So one thing we're talking about is the founder-operator tension.
Yes.
So what you detailed there of the octopus, and having to literally do, you know, everything's on you. That's almost like you've come from the operator background, and then working with the founder, being a founder, you realise it's kind of a very different game. As a business scales, you need operators and you need founders. Founders have the magic. Operators create the scaffolding that actually builds business. Let's talk about Nick Jones, Soho House. You worked with him for X number of
2.5 years.
2.5 years. Yeah. I think Soho House is one of those businesses that have scaled, but kept their panache and the twinkle in their eye and the uniqueness of it. And they've gone across like multiple different brands as well, like Molly's Motel, all that stuff. Talk to me about founder-operator tension. Like, from an operator's perspective, what's the best way to work with the founder's magic, but then build the scaffolding around it to create?
I think you've got to come in. The big one is that you're both starting with empty bank accounts of trust. So you've got to kind of, you know, in the first 3-6 months, there are going to be situations that are going to test you both. And I think it's that first few steps and how you react, how the trust is between you, how the honesty is. You know, if you're, you know, bullshitting, and I've, you know, seen, you know, what it's like people to bullshit Nick, you get caught out really badly. And at the end of the day, it's a little bit like, you know, when you have a kid and you take it to school, you hand it over to the teacher and you're not really sure what's going on. You know, you've got a rough idea, but it's just like, that's just my everything that I'm handing to you. And they're like, yeah, bye, see ya, off you go. And for a founder to kind of relinquish control, there's got to be that trust, and there's got to be that, you know, do you really get what I see? And I think with certainly working with Nick, just standing back and just watching him is what you've got to do.
So when you sat back and watched him, what did you observe? Like, why is he such a force?
Phenomenal. I mean, seriously, the guy's a